Story 1. My husband assaulted me in front of his entire family, and no one stood up to him. But my daughter did something that made him turn pale. My name is Amanda, and I need to tell you something that changed everything. 3 years ago, I thought I knew what rock bottom felt like. I was wrong. It was Thanksgiving 2021, and I was standing in my own dining room, my cheek burning from the slap that had just echoed through the house. The turkey I'd spent 4 hours preparing sat untouched on the table, surrounded by his family members, who were looking at me with a mixture of satisfaction and disgust. "Maybe now you'll learn some respect," his mother said, dabbing her mouth with the cloth napkin I'd ironed that morning. "A woman should know her place." His sister nodded approvingly. "Poor Marcus has been dealing with this attitude for years. We've been telling him he's too patient with you." I stood there, my hand pressed against my stinging cheek, feeling smaller than I ever had in my 32 years. Marcus towered over me, his 6-foot frame casting a shadow across the mahogany table his mother had insisted we buy with money we didn't have. The same table where I'd served countless meals to people who treated me like hired help. "Sit down and eat," he commanded, his voice still carrying the edge that had preceded the violence. "And maybe think about what you did to deserve that." What had I done? I'd asked his uncle to please not smoke cigars in the house because Lucy had asthma. That was it. That was my crime, worthy of public humiliation. I looked around the table at these people I'd tried so hard to please for 7 years. His father, an insurance salesman who acted like he ran Wall Street. His mother, who'd never worked a day but criticized my every attempt at contributing to our household. His sister, Monica, who'd been divorced twice but felt qualified to give marriage advice. His uncle Pete, whose cigar smoke was apparently more important than my daughter's ability to breathe. They were all watching me, waiting to see if I'd crumble completely. I could feel their anticipation, their hunger for my total surrender. Then I heard a small, calm voice from the kitchen doorway. "Daddy, you shouldn't have done that." Lucy stood there, all 52 pounds of her, holding her tablet in her small hands. She looked so tiny in her purple dress, the one I'd bought specially for today, hoping this Thanksgiving would be different. Marcus turned toward his daughter, his face still flushed with anger. "Go to your room, Lucy. Adults are talking." But Lucy didn't move. She looked directly at her father with those dark eyes that were exactly like mine and spoke with a composure that would have impressed seasoned negotiators. "I recorded everything. Daddy, the hitting, and what everyone said after. I already sent it to Grandpa Jim." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus' face went from red to white in seconds. His mother's fork clattered against her plate. "What did you just say?" Monica whispered. Lucy held up her tablet, and I could see the recording app was still running. "I've been recording you for weeks, Daddy. Grandpa Jim taught me how. He said, if anyone ever hurt Mommy, I should make sure there was proof." Marcus lunged toward Lucy, but she stepped back quickly. "I already uploaded everything to the cloud. Daddy, Grandpa Jim has copies now. He's probably already on his way." I watched my 9-year-old daughter, this tiny person I'd been trying so desperately to protect, and realized she'd been protecting me instead. While I'd been suffering in silence, she'd been building a case. His Uncle Pete stood up abruptly. "We should go. Nobody's going anywhere until we figure this out," Marcus snarled, but his voice was shaking now. Lucy looked at her father with pity that seemed far too mature for her age. "Grandpa Jim says men who hit women are cowards. Daddy, he's going to want to have a talk with you. Let me take you back 3 hours before that moment to show you how we got there." It was 2 p.m., and I was standing in my kitchen methodically basting the 18 pounds turkey that would feed the people who despised me. My hands were shaking slightly, not from nervousness about the meal, but from the verbal assault I'd endured since dawn. "The stuffing smells burned," Marcus had announced from his recliner, though I knew it wasn't. I'd made the same recipe for 7 years, perfecting it each time, hoping someday it would earn me a single compliment. "I'll check it again," I'd replied, keeping my voice level. Experience had taught me that any hint of defensiveness would trigger an escalation. Lucy sat at the kitchen island, supposedly doing homework, but actually watching me with those perceptive eyes. At 9, she developed an unsettling ability to read the emotional temperature of our house. She knew that when Daddy's voice carried that particular edge, when Mommy's shoulders tensed in that specific way, trouble was coming. "Mama," she whispered when Marcus went upstairs to shower, "your face is doing that thing again." I touched my jaw, realizing I'd been clenching it so tightly my teeth ached. "What thing, baby?" "The scared thing, like when you're trying not to cry." I knelt beside her chair, smoothing her dark hair that was so much like my own. "I'm just tired, sweetheart. Big dinners are a lot of work." But Lucy wasn't buying it. She'd inherited my intuition along with my eyes. And at 9, she was already more emotionally intelligent than her father would ever be. "He's going to be mean to you today," she said matter-of-factly, coloring in her math worksheet with purple crayon. "Grandma Patricia called this morning. I heard her say, 'You better not embarrass the family.'" My heart sank. I'd hoped Marcus's mother would skip this year, maybe visit Monica instead. But Patricia never missed an opportunity to remind me of my inadequacies in front of an audience. "Lucy, you don't need to worry about grown-up stuff," I said, though we both knew she'd been worrying about grown-up stuff since she was old enough to understand that other daddies didn't make their mommies flinch. Marcus' footsteps thundered down the stairs, and Lucy immediately straightened in her chair, pencil poised over her homework like a shield. We'd both learned to recognize his moods by the sound of his approach. "Why does it smell like something's burning down here?" he demanded, though nothing was burning. "I don't smell anything burning," I said carefully. "Are you calling me a liar, Amanda?" This was the trap, the one I fell into every time despite knowing better. If I agreed with him, I was admitting incompetence. If I disagreed, I was challenging his authority. There was no right answer. "No, Marcus. I'll double-check everything." He walked to the stove and lifted the lid off the green bean casserole, making a show of waving away imaginary smoke. "Jesus Christ, Amanda. My family's going to think I married someone who can't even cook." Lucy's crayon pressed harder against her paper, and I saw her jaw clench the same way mine did. She was learning to carry tension in her little body, preparing for the explosion that might or might not come. "The beans look perfect, Daddy," Lucy said quietly, her voice carefully neutral. Marcus' attention shifted to his daughter. "Did I ask for your opinion?" "No, sir." "Then keep it to yourself." I watched my daughter's face close off, watched her retreat into that careful blankness she'd perfected as a survival mechanism. At 9 years old, she was already an expert at making herself small and invisible when the emotional weather turned dangerous. The doorbell rang and Marcus immediately transformed. His face relaxed into the charming smile he reserved for outsiders. His voice dropped to the warm, reasonable tone that had fooled me when we first met. "That must be Mom and Dad," he said, kissing my forehead like a loving husband. "You look beautiful, honey." I almost laughed at the performance. In the span of 30 seconds, he'd morphed from my tormentor into my devoted partner, ready to play the role of the perfect son-in-law. Lucy watched this transformation with clinical interest, and I realized she was studying him, learning his patterns, cataloging his behaviors like a tiny anthropologist documenting a dangerous species. "Mama," she whispered as Marcus went to answer the door, "do you want me to stay close to you today?" My 9-year-old daughter was offering to be my bodyguard. And the terrible thing was I almost said yes. They came through my front door like a conquering army, armed with cutting remarks disguised as concern and criticism wrapped in false affection. Patricia, Marcus' mother, swept in wearing her favorite weapon, a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She air-kissed my cheeks while scanning my appearance with the thoroughness of a building inspector looking for code violations. "Amanda, dear," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You look tired. Are you sleeping enough?" It was her opening move, disguised as maternal concern, but designed to plant the seed that I looked haggard, worn down, insufficient for her precious son. Marcus' father, Robert, followed behind her, already reaching for his phone to check the stock market because apparently even Thanksgiving couldn't compete with his portfolio's performance. He managed a grunt of acknowledgement in my direction before settling into what had become his chair in my living room. But it was Monica who brought the real artillery. Marcus' 35-year-old sister had perfected the art of the backhanded compliment, and she deployed her first strike before she'd even removed her coat. "Oh, Amanda, you kept the same hairstyle. How consistent of you. I just got mine done at that new salon in downtown. You know, the expensive one. It's amazing what a good cut can do for a woman's confidence." Lucy appeared beside me, pressing against my legs like she was trying to shield me with her small body. Monica noticed and smiled the way people smile when they see something pathetic trying to be brave. "And here's our little Lucy. My goodness, child. You've gotten so serious looking. Are you eating enough? You seem thin." Within 5 minutes, Monica had criticized my parenting by implying I wasn't feeding my daughter properly. It was masterful in its efficiency. Uncle Pete wandered in last, already lighting a cigar despite the fact that we were indoors and Lucy had asthma. When I'd married Marcus, Pete had seemed like the fun uncle, full of stories and laughter. But 7 years had shown me he was just another man who believed his comfort mattered more than everyone else's well-being. "Amanda, sweetheart," Patricia said, settling herself at the head of my dining table like a queen claiming her throne. "I ran into Janet Morrison at the country club last week. You remember Janet? Her daughter Melissa married that successful attorney. Well, Melissa just bought the most beautiful house in Riverside Estates. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, granite countertops throughout." I knew where this was going. Patricia loved to regale me with tales of other women's successes, always with the implicit message that I was holding Marcus back from similar achievements. "That sounds lovely," I managed, retrieving serving spoons from the kitchen. "It really is," Patricia continued, her voice carrying across the house. "Of course, Melissa has such a head for business. She's been helping her husband's practice, really supporting his career instead of—" She gestured vaguely around my modest home. "Well, instead of whatever this is supposed to be." Monica picked up the thread seamlessly. "Melissa always was the smart one in their friend group. Remember how she got her real estate license? Now she's making more money than some of the men in town. It's so inspiring to see a woman who really applies herself." I was being dissected by experts, my inadequacies laid bare with surgical precision. The message was clear. Other wives were assets to their husbands while I was dead weight. Lucy disappeared into her room, claiming she needed to finish homework. I envied her escape route. "Amanda, dear." Robert finally looked up from his phone. "Marcus tells me you've been talking about going back to school again. Nursing, wasn't it?" My heart jumped. Marcus had promised to discuss my career plans privately with his parents to maybe get their support for what would be a significant family investment. "Yes," I said carefully. "I've always wanted to help people. And with Lucy getting older, I thought, at your age." Patricia interrupted with a laugh that wasn't quite cruel enough to call her out on, but wasn't kind either. "Darling, nursing school is so demanding. All those young girls with their energy and, well, their advantages. Wouldn't your time be better spent focusing on what you have here?" Monica nodded sagely. "Plus, the cost. Marcus works so hard already. It seems selfish to add that kind of financial burden when you could just, maybe get a part-time job at a retail store or something." They were destroying my dreams with the efficiency of a demolition crew, making it sound like practicality instead of cruelty. "Besides," Patricia added, "Lucy needs her mother home. Children from broken schedules often develop problems. Look at the Morrison boy. Brilliant child. But his mother worked too much during his formative years, and now he's in therapy." I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller with each word, until I was nothing but a collection of failures and poor decisions. Marcus watched it all with the satisfied expression of a man whose family was doing his dirty work for him. Dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare, disguised as family conversation. I'd outdone myself with the meal. The turkey was perfectly golden, the stuffing was moist but not soggy, and the cranberry sauce had just the right balance of tart and sweet. But perfection had never been enough to earn me peace in this house. "This turkey is a little dry," Patricia announced after her first bite, though I could see the juice running down her fork. I think it's delicious, Lucy said quietly, her small act of rebellion earning her a sharp look from her grandmother. Children don't really have developed palates, dear, Patricia replied with false patience. Amanda, you might try brining next time. Melissa Morrison's turkey is always so moist. She uses some special technique she learned from a cooking class. There it was again. The comparison to the mythical Melissa, perfect wife and daughter-in-law, who apparently excelled at everything I failed to do adequately. Monica picked up the torch. Speaking of classes, didn't you say you wanted to take some? What was it again? Nursing. She said the word like it tasted bad. I mentioned it, I said carefully, aware that Marcus was watching me with warning eyes. How exactly would that work? Robert asked, his tone suggesting he already knew it wouldn't. With Marcus' schedule and Lucy's needs. Seems pretty selfish to abandon your family responsibilities for some fantasy career. It's not a fantasy, I said, and immediately regretted the defensive edge in my voice. The table fell silent. I'd crossed a line by contradicting the family patriarch. Monica laughed, breaking the tension. Oh, Amanda, you always were a dreamer. Remember when you wanted to go back to school after Lucy was born? And that time you talked about starting a catering business? You have so many ideas, but follow-through has never been your strong suit. Each word was a carefully placed knife, cutting away at my confidence with surgical precision. They turned my hopes into evidence of my instability, my dreams into proof of my inadequacy. Maybe we should focus on being grateful for what we have, Marcus said, his voice carrying that dangerous undertone I knew too well. Uncle Pete, who'd been steadily working through a bottle of wine while smoking his cigars, decided to join the conversation. You know what your problem is, Amanda? You don't appreciate what you've got. Marcus works his ass off, pardon the language, to provide for this family. And instead of being thankful, you're always wanting more. I just want to contribute, I began. Contribute. Pete's voice rose. You think raising a child and keeping house isn't contributing? What's wrong with women these days? My generation understood what marriage meant. Lucy had stopped eating, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth as she watched the adults tear apart her mother's character. Maybe Amanda feels unfulfilled because she doesn't put enough effort into what she already has, Patricia suggested with false compassion. A happy wife finds joy in her husband's success, in her child's well-being. When we're constantly reaching for more, we miss the blessings right in front of us. They were suffocating me with their twisted logic, making my desire for education and purpose sound like ingratitude and selfishness. Monica delivered the final blow. Besides, Amanda, let's be honest, you're 32. Even if you did finish nursing school, you'd be competing with girls who are 22 and don't have all the complications of family life. It's just not realistic. Something inside me snapped. Not the explosive kind of snap that leads to dramatic confrontations, but the quiet kind that happens when you finally see clearly through years of carefully constructed gaslighting. You know what? I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. I'm 32, not 92, and maybe those 22-year-olds don't have my life experience, my motivation, or my understanding of what really matters. The silence that followed was arctic. Marcus' face flushed red. Amanda. His voice carried a warning that anyone else would have heeded. But I was done being warned, done being silenced, done being made small by people who needed me diminished to feel powerful. No, Marcus. I'm tired of apologizing for having ambitions. I'm tired of pretending that wanting more than this makes me ungrateful. That's when he hit me. The slap echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. And for a moment, everyone froze. Then Patricia smiled, actually smiled, and nodded approvingly. Finally, she murmured, a woman needs boundaries. Let me tell you about Mrs. Stanley, Lucy's third-grade teacher, and how a simple school project became the key to our freedom. It was October, about a month before that devastating Thanksgiving dinner. Lucy had come home from school carrying a manila folder and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. Serious, but not troubled, like she was processing something important. Mama, I need help with a project, she announced. settling at the kitchen table where she always did her homework. I was folding laundry, grateful for a peaceful moment while Marcus was still at work. These quiet hours between Lucy's return from school and Marcus' arrival home had become precious to me. The only time I could breathe freely in my own house. "What kind of project, baby?" Lucy opened her folder and pulled out a worksheet titled Family Dynamic Study. My stomach clenched instinctively, though I couldn't have explained why. "Mrs. Stanley says we need to observe and document how families communicate and solve problems," Lucy explained, reading directly from the instruction sheet. "We have to record interactions between family members for 2 weeks and then write a report about what we learned." I sat down beside her, scanning the assignment. It seemed innocent enough, asking children to notice patterns in how their families functioned, to identify communication styles, to observe conflict resolution methods. "Mrs. Stanley says, some families are really good at talking through disagreements, and some families have different approaches," Lucy continued, her 9-year-old brain clearly working through concepts that were more complex than typical third-grade material. "What exactly does she want you to record?" I asked, though part of me already suspected where this was heading. Lucy flipped to the next page, which contained detailed instructions about documentation methods. Students could write journals, create charts, or even use technology like tablets or phones to record family conversations. With permission, of course. "She says it's important to capture real interactions, not just what we think happens," Lucy said, her dark eyes meeting mine. "Sometimes families don't realize their own patterns until someone outside points them out." I felt a chill run down my spine. Mrs. Stanley had been Lucy's teacher for 2 months, and she'd struck me as unusually perceptive during our parent-teacher conference. She'd asked careful questions about Lucy's home life, noting that my daughter seemed hypervigilant and unusually mature for her age. "Did Mrs. Stanley say anything else about this project?" I asked. Lucy nodded. "She said some kids might discover things about their families that surprise them, and if anyone feels unsafe or uncomfortable with what they observe, they should talk to her privately." The woman was brilliant. Without directly asking children to report abuse, she'd created a legitimate academic framework for them to document and seek help for unhealthy family situations. "She also said we can share our recordings with other family members if we want to," Lucy added. "Like if we want to show our observations to grandparents or aunts and uncles who might be interested in family patterns." I stared at my daughter, this wise little person who seemed to understand the implications of this assignment better than most adults would. "Lucy," I said carefully, "you know, Daddy sometimes gets frustrated when he's tired from work, right?" She nodded solemnly. "I know, Mama. Mrs. Stanley says all families have stress, but healthy families find ways to manage it without hurting each other." Without hurting each other. The phrase hung in the air between us like a revelation. "Would you like me to help you with this project?" I offered, though I wasn't sure I was ready for what we might discover. Lucy's face lit up with something I hadn't seen in months. Genuine excitement mixed with hope. "Yes, Mrs. Stanley says the most important thing is being honest about what we see, even if it's uncomfortable." That afternoon, while Marcus was still at work, Lucy and I set up her documentation system. She decided to use her tablet to record interactions with backup notes in a composition journal. We practiced with harmless conversations, discussing homework, planning weekend activities, talking about her day at school. But even in these innocent moments, I noticed patterns I'd never consciously acknowledged. How my voice automatically became smaller and more careful when we heard Marcus' car in the driveway. How Lucy instinctively moved closer to me when his footsteps approached. How both of us unconsciously braced for criticism or conflict. "Mama," Lucy said as we finished setting up her observation materials. "Grandpa Jim called yesterday when you were at the store." My father had been checking in more frequently lately, though he lived 3 states away. A retired Army colonel, he had an uncanny ability to sense when something was wrong with his family. "What did you two talk about?" Lucy looked at me with those old eyes in her young face. "I asked him a hypothetical question." "What kind of hypothetical question?" "I asked him what he would do if someone was hurting you." 2 weeks after Lucy began her school project, she asked me to sit with her in her bedroom after dinner. Marcus was downstairs watching television, his mood relatively stable after a good day at work, which meant we could speak freely without risk. Lucy closed her bedroom door and pulled out a small wooden box she kept on her bookshelf, the same box where she stored her most treasured possessions. Ticket stubs from our rare mother-daughter movie dates, birthday cards from my father, and a photo of us at the beach from 2 summers ago when she'd convinced Marcus to let us visit my family. "Mama, I need to show you something," she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone much older than 9. She opened the box and pulled out her tablet along with a composition notebook filled with her careful 9-year-old handwriting. The sight made my stomach clench with a mixture of pride and terror. "I've been recording everything just like Mrs. Stanley taught us," Lucy said, settling cross-legged on her purple bedspread. "But I haven't just been recording for school." She opened the tablet and showed me a folder labeled Family Observations. Inside were dozens of audio files, each one dated and time-stamped with frightening precision. "Lucy, honey, what is all this evidence?" she said simply, with the matter-of-fact tone she'd inherited from my military father. "Mrs. Stanley says that when people do bad things, it's important to have proof so the right people can help." With small fingers that shook only slightly, she opened her composition notebook and showed me pages of meticulous documentation. Dates, times, descriptions of incidents, and her emotional responses to what she'd witnessed. October 15th, 6:30 p.m. Daddy yelled at Mama about dinner being late. Mama apologized even though she was only 5 minutes late. Daddy called her stupid. Mama's hands shook when she served his plate. October 18th, 7:45 a.m. Daddy said Mama's hair looked like a bird's nest and asked why she couldn't try to look decent. Mama went to the bathroom and I heard her crying. October 22nd, 8:20 p.m. Daddy grabbed Mama's arm when she tried to leave the room during an argument. Left marks. Mama wore long sleeves the next day. "Lucy?" I whispered, my heart breaking as I read her careful documentation of my humiliation. "Baby, why didn't you tell me you were doing this?" "Because I knew you'd try to stop me," she said with devastating honesty. "And because Mrs. Stanley says adults sometimes can't see their own situations clearly when they're scared." She was right, and her clarity was both impressive and heartbreaking. My 9-year-old daughter had recognized what I'd been unable to admit to myself, that we were living in a situation that required documentation, evidence, and outside intervention. "I called Grandpa Jim again yesterday," she continued, "and I asked him another hypothetical question." "What did you ask him this time?" "I asked him if he'd want to know if someone was hurting his daughter and granddaughter, even if his daughter was too scared to tell him herself." My father. Of course, she'd thought of him. Colonel James Mitchell, who'd spent 30 years in the Army and had very specific opinions about men who hurt women. The same man who taught me to shoot when I was 12 and had made it clear that any boy who wanted to date me would have to meet his standards first. "What did Grandpa say?" Lucy's face grew serious. "He said any man who hurts his family is a coward and a criminal. He said if someone was hurting us, he'd want proof so he could make sure it stopped forever." "Lucy, sweetheart, this is a very grown-up situation." "Mama, I'm already living in a grown-up situation," she interrupted, her voice steady but sad. "I've been tiptoeing around Daddy's mood since I was little. I've been watching him hurt you and learning to be quiet so he won't hurt me, too. I'm already grown up in all the ways that matter." She was right, and the truth of it cut through me like a blade. She pulled out another notebook, this one smaller and bound with a rubber band. "I also made copies of everything and hid them in different places. One set is in my locker at school, one is with Mrs. Stanley, and one is uploaded to an email account that only Grandpa Jim and I know about." My 9-year-old had created a comprehensive evidence preservation system that would impress federal investigators. "Lucy, what's your plan with all this?" She looked at me with eyes that held both love and determination. "I'm waiting for the right moment, Mama. When Daddy does something really bad in front of witnesses. When there's no way for anyone to pretend it didn't happen or wasn't that serious. And then I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth. And I'm going to make sure Grandpa Jim can protect us the way he's always wanted to." My father had always been perceptive, but Lucy's phone call the next evening took his awareness to a whole new level. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard her talking quietly in the living room. Marcus was working late again, which had become more common as his frustration with life at home intensified. "Hi, Grandpa Jim," Lucy said, her voice carrying that careful neutrality she'd perfected for difficult conversations. "I wanted to ask you something for my school project about families." I moved closer to the doorway, pretending to organize the mail while listening to my daughter's half of the conversation. "Well, I'm supposed to learn about how different families solve problems," she continued. "So, I was wondering if someone in a family was being mean to someone else, like really mean, what would you do?" There was a long pause as my father responded. I could imagine his face, the way his jaw tightened when he sensed trouble brewing around the people he loved. "But what if the person being mean was bigger and stronger?" Lucy asked. "And what if the person being hurt was too scared to ask for help?" Another pause. Lucy was walking a tightrope, gathering information while maintaining the pretense that this was academic curiosity. "Hypothetically," she said, using a word that seemed too sophisticated for a 9-year-old but fit perfectly with her precocious intelligence. "If someone was hurting you and Mama, would you want to know? Even if we didn't tell you directly." I had to grip the door frame to keep from sinking to my knees. My daughter was reaching out to her grandfather, creating a bridge between our isolation and the help we desperately needed. "Okay," Lucy said, her voice brightening slightly. "And if someone did want to tell you about something bad happening, how would they do it? Like, what kind of proof would help you understand?" The conversation continued for another 10 minutes with Lucy asking increasingly specific questions disguised as academic curiosity. By the time she hung up, she'd essentially created an instruction manual for reporting domestic abuse to a retired military officer. "Mama," she called softly, "can you come here?" I found her sitting on the couch looking simultaneously like a little girl and like someone carrying the weight of adult responsibilities. "Grandpa Jim wants to talk to you," she said, handing me the phone. My father's voice was gentle but carried an edge I recognized from my childhood, the tone he used when he was preparing for battle. "Amanda, sweetheart, Lucy's been asking some very interesting questions about family dynamics." "Has she?" I tried to keep my voice light, but my father had known me for 32 years. Questions that sound less like school curiosity and more like someone trying to figure out how to report a serious problem. The silence stretched between us across 3 states and 7 years of carefully maintained lies. "Dad, everything's fine here. Lucy just takes her schoolwork very seriously. And Amanda," his voice was quiet but firm, "I didn't spend 30 years in the army without learning to read between the lines. And I didn't raise you to lie to me when you're in trouble." I could feel tears threatening, the relief of being truly heard after years of being dismissed and minimized. "If someone is hurting you or Lucy, I need to know. And if you can't tell me directly, then I need you to understand that there are other ways to communicate." "Other ways?" Lucy mentioned the school project involves documentation, recording family interactions. If someone were to share those recordings with me, I'd know exactly what to do with them. My father was giving me permission to ask for help without having to find the courage to ask directly. He was creating a safety net for both Lucy and me. "Dad," I whispered, "what if it's complicated? What if leaving isn't simple?" "Honey, I've seen complicated. I've handled complicated. What I can't handle is knowing my daughter and granddaughter are in danger." Thanksgiving morning arrived gray and cold, matching the dread that had settled in my chest like a stone. I'd been awake since 4 a.m., not because I needed the extra time to prepare, but because sleep had become impossible when I knew what was coming. Lucy found me in the kitchen at 5:30, already dressed in her purple dress and moving with the quiet efficiency of someone executing a carefully planned mission. "Morning, Mama," she said, kissing my cheek before settling at the kitchen island with her tablet and a glass of orange juice. "You're up early, baby." "I wanted to make sure everything was ready," she said, and something in her tone made me look at her more carefully. She had the focused calm of my father before he deployed, that particular stillness that came from knowing exactly what needed to be done and being prepared to do it. "Lucy, are you okay?" She looked up from her tablet where I could see she was reviewing files in her family observations folder. I'm ready, Mama. Are you? I wasn't sure I'd ever be ready for what this day might bring. But looking at my 9-year-old daughter's determined face, I realized readiness wasn't the point. Sometimes survival required action regardless of readiness. Marcus appeared in the kitchen at 7 a.m., already dressed in his good shirt and carrying the particular energy that preceded family gatherings. A mixture of performance anxiety and preemptive defensiveness that made him more volatile than usual. "The house better be spotless when they get here," he announced, pouring coffee with more force than necessary. "And I don't want any of your attitude today, Amanda. My family doesn't need to see you sulking." I was learning to recognize these preemptive strikes, ways of establishing dominance before the audience arrived, setting the emotional tone that would justify whatever came later. "Everything's under control," I said, keeping my voice neutral while checking the turkey one more time. Lucy watched this exchange with those observant eyes, her tablet positioned discreetly on the counter. I wondered if she was recording already, building her final collection of evidence. "Lucy, go get dressed properly," Marcus commanded, though she was already dressed perfectly. "And brush your hair. You look like you stuck your finger in a light socket." "Yes, Daddy," Lucy replied without argument, but I saw her jaw tighten the same way mine did when swallowing insults. As she walked past me toward the stairs, she whispered, "It's almost time, Mama." The morning passed in a blur of final preparations and mounting tension. Marcus found fault with everything. The way I'd arranged the silverware, the temperature of the house, the fact that I'd chosen to wear my navy dress instead of the black one his mother preferred. Each criticism was carefully catalogued by Lucy, who had positioned herself strategically throughout the house, her tablet always within reach, always recording. At 11 a.m., she approached me while Marcus was in the shower. "Mama, I need to send something to Grandpa Jim before everyone gets here." "What do you need to send?" "Everything," she said simply. "All the recordings from the past month, plus the special ones from this morning. Grandpa Jim said timing is important in military operations." I knelt down to her level, looking into eyes that held far too much knowledge for a 9-year-old. "Lucy, once you send those files, there's no taking them back. Everything changes after that." She nodded solemnly. "I know, Mama, but keeping secrets about bad things doesn't make them stop. It just makes them worse." With steady fingers, she composed an email to my father. The subject line read, "Family Project, Final Documentation." The message was brief. "Grandpa Jim, here are all my observations for my school project about family communication. I think you'll find them very educational. Love, Lucy. P.S. We might need that help we talked about soon." She hit send at 11:47 a.m., 13 minutes before Marcus' family was due to arrive. "It's done," she announced, closing her tablet and looking at me with a mixture of relief and determination. "Now we wait for the right moment." The silence that followed Lucy's announcement stretched like a held breath. Marcus' family sat frozen around my dining table, their faces cycling through disbelief, panic, and fury. Marcus himself had gone completely white, his hands still raised from where he'd struck me moments before. The confident patriarch who'd been terrorizing his family suddenly looked like a frightened child who'd been caught breaking something valuable. "What exactly did you send your grandfather?" Patricia asked, her voice barely controlled. The superior smile had vanished, replaced by the sharp calculation of someone assessing damage. Lucy looked at her grandmother with the same clinical detachment she'd shown her father. "Everything, Grandma Patricia. All the recordings of Daddy hurting Mama. All the times he called her stupid or grabbed her or made her cry. Plus, what just happened here?" Monica stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Marcus, tell me she's making this up. Tell me you haven't been." "I haven't been anything," Marcus exploded, but his voice cracked on the lie. "This is insane. She's 9 years old. Who's going to believe Grandpa Jim will?" Lucy interrupted calmly. "Especially since I have dates, times, and recordings. Mrs. Stanley taught us that good documentation makes truth easy to verify." Uncle Pete, who'd been steadily drinking throughout dinner, slammed his wine glass down hard enough to slosh red wine across the white tablecloth. "Jesus Christ, Marcus, what have you done?" I haven't done anything that wasn't. Marcus started, then stopped, realizing that any justification would be an admission. Patricia had recovered enough to attempt damage control. Lucy, sweetheart, families have disagreements sometimes. That doesn't mean. Grandma, I have recordings of Daddy calling Mama worthless, stupid, and a waste of space, Lucy said matter-of-factly. I have him threatening to take me away from her if she didn't learn to behave. I have him grabbing her hard enough to leave bruises. Mrs. Stanley says those aren't disagreements. She says those are crimes. The word crimes hit the table like a physical blow. Robert, who'd been frantically scrolling through his phone, looked up with the expression of a man calculating financial ruin. Do you have any idea what this could do to the family reputation? He hissed at Marcus. To the business? Marcus lunged toward Lucy, but she'd positioned herself strategically near the kitchen doorway and stepped back quickly. The recordings are already uploaded to the cloud. Daddy, Grandpa Jim has copies and Mrs. Stanley has copies, and I sent some to myself at 3 different email addresses. Even if you broke my tablet, they'd still exist. My 9-year-old daughter had outmaneuvered a room full of adults with the strategic thinking of a seasoned prosecutor. Monica turned on me with vicious desperation. This is your fault, Amanda. You turned her against her own family. What kind of mother? The kind who documents abuse so her daughter doesn't grow up thinking it's normal, Lucy answered before I could speak. Grandpa Jim says children who witness violence often become violent themselves unless someone intervenes. Patricia was now pacing behind her chair, her elegant composure completely shattered. We can fix this. We can explain that it was taken out of context. That Marcus was just what? Lucy asked with devastating innocence. Just hitting women? Just making threats? Just teaching me that this is how men treat their families. The front door chimed and every adult in the room jumped like they'd been electrocuted. Lucy smiled for the first time all day. That's probably Grandpa Jim. I texted him the address after I sent the recordings. He said he was driving straight here from Pennsylvania. Through the front window, I could see my father's familiar silhouette approaching the door, along with 2 other men whose military bearing was unmistakable, even in civilian clothes. Marcus looked like he might vomit. Lucy, he said desperately, whatever I did, I'm sorry. We can fix this as a family. We don't need outside. Daddy, Lucy interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. Grandpa Jim says apologies don't count when someone only says sorry after they get caught. The doorbell rang, strong and insistent. Lucy looked around the table at the adults who'd spent the day tearing down her mother, and her expression was pure steel. I think it's time for the grown-ups to have a real conversation about family dynamics. My father filled the doorway like an avenging angel in a pressed shirt and khaki pants. At 62, Colonel James Mitchell still carried himself with the bearing of a man accustomed to command, and the 2 men flanking him had the same unmistakable military presence. Amanda, he said, his voice gentle as his eyes found mine, then hardened to steel as they swept the room. Lucy called and said you might need some assistance with a family discussion. Marcus had shrunk back against the dining room wall, his earlier bravado evaporating in the face of 3 men who looked like they'd handled bigger problems than a small-town bully. Dad, I started, but he held up one hand. I've heard the recordings, sweetheart. All of them. We can talk later. His attention fixed on Marcus with laser precision. Right now, I think this gentleman and I need to have a conversation outside. This is my house, Marcus stammered, trying to summon authority he no longer possessed. And these are my daughter and granddaughter. My father replied with the quiet certainty of a man stating natural law. Gentlemen, would you mind joining us in the backyard? I think some fresh air might help clarify everyone's thinking. The 2 men with him, who I later learned were retired military police and longtime family friends, stepped forward with the coordinated movement of people who'd worked together before. This is kidnapping, Patricia shrieked, but her voice carried no real conviction. Ma'am, we're just facilitating a discussion between men. One of my father's companions said politely. Sometimes these conversations require privacy to be fully productive. Marcus looked around the room desperately, seeking support from his family, but they'd all discovered urgent interest in their plates, their phones, anything but meeting his eyes. "Marcus," my father said, his tone conversational but carrying absolute authority. "We can do this easy or we can do it hard, but we're going to do it." 20 minutes later, Marcus returned to the dining room looking like he'd been through a washing machine. His shirt was dirty, there was grass in his hair, and he was walking with the careful gait of someone who'd recently learned some hard lessons about physics. My father and his friends followed, looking perfectly composed, except for my father's slightly scuffed knuckles. "Marcus has some things he'd like to discuss with everyone," my father announced pleasantly. Marcus cleared his throat, his voice noticeably shaky. I'm going to be moving out tonight, and I'll be signing divorce papers with a very generous settlement for Amanda and Lucy." "How generous?" Robert asked sharply, his accountant's instincts kicking in despite the circumstances. One of my father's companions pulled out a manila folder and handed it to Marcus, who opened it with shaking hands. "The house is Amanda's, free and clear," Marcus read in a voice barely above a whisper. "Full custody of Lucy to Amanda with supervised visitation only after completion of court-mandated counseling. Monthly support payments of $4,000 until Lucy turns 18. Patricia gasped. $4,000? That's fair compensation for 7 years of unpaid labor and psychological abuse, my father finished calmly. Plus, there's a clause about Lucy's college fund. Marcus will be contributing $25,000 annually until she graduates." Marcus continued reading with the enthusiasm of a man reading his own execution warrant. "I waive any claim to retirement accounts, savings, or other assets. I agree to attend anger management and domestic violence counseling. I acknowledge that any violation of these terms or any contact with Amanda or Lucy outside of supervised visitation will result in..." He trailed off, apparently unwilling to finish the sentence. "Will result in what?" Monica demanded. My father smiled, and it wasn't a friendly expression. "Let's just say Marcus and I have reached an understanding about the consequences of future bad behavior." Uncle Pete, whose cigar had gone out during the outdoor discussion, was staring at Marcus with something approaching respect for the first time I'd ever witnessed. "Jesus, Marcus, just sign it," he muttered. "Cut your losses." Marcus looked around the table one more time, searching for allies who were no longer there. His family had already begun the process of distancing themselves from him, protecting their own interests now that his behavior had become a liability instead of an amusing character flaw. "I'll need a pen," he said quietly. Lucy, who'd been watching the entire proceeding with the fascination of someone seeing justice served in real time, handed her father a purple crayon from her school supplies. "Use this, Daddy," she said with perfect innocence. "It's the same color as my dress." 6 months after that Thanksgiving dinner, Lucy and I were sitting in our kitchen now, reviewing acceptance letters from 3 different nursing programs. The house felt completely different without Marcus' oppressive presence. Colors seemed brighter, sounds seemed softer, and for the first time in years, I could breathe freely in my own home. We'd redecorated Lucy's room in shades of purple and silver, and I'd turned Marcus' former man cave into a study space where I could do my coursework. "I think you should choose Metropolitan Community College," Lucy said, spreading the brochures across the kitchen table with the same methodical attention she'd given to documenting our old life. "Their clinical rotation program has the best hospital partnerships." At 10 years old, my daughter had become my most trusted advisor, though she was finally acting more like a child and less like a tiny war strategist. "How do you know about clinical rotations?" I asked, marveling at her research skills. "I called and asked. I told them my mom was applying and I wanted to make sure she picked the best program." She grinned. "The admissions counselor thought I was really mature for my age. I was starting classes in the fall, using the generous divorce settlement to finally pursue the dream that had been deferred for so long. Marcus' monthly payments, combined with my part-time job at a local clinic, meant we could live comfortably while I focused on my education. The transformation in both of us had been remarkable. Lucy had blossomed into a confident, curious child who no longer flinched at raised voices or watched doorways for signs of danger. Her teacher, Mrs. Stanley, had become not just an educator, but a family friend, checking in regularly and celebrating each milestone in our recovery. "Mom," Lucy said, using the more grown-up title she'd recently adopted. "I got a letter today, too." She handed me an official-looking envelope addressed to Lucy Mitchell Henderson. Inside was a certificate of recognition from the County Child Protection Services acknowledging her courage and initiative in protecting family safety. "They want me to speak at a conference for teachers and social workers," she explained, about recognizing signs of domestic violence and how to help kids document unsafe situations. My brave girl was turning her traumatic experience into a tool for helping others. The strength she'd shown during our darkest times was now being channeled into advocacy and education. The doorbell rang and Lucy jumped up to answer it. Through the window, I could see Marcus' sedan parked at the curb, his supervised visitation day. The court-mandated counseling had begun to show some effects. Marcus was more subdued now, careful with his words and movements around Lucy. The swagger and entitlement had been replaced by something approaching humility, though I suspected it was born more from fear of consequences than genuine remorse. "Hi, Daddy," Lucy said politely as she opened the door. Their relationship was civil but distant now, like acquaintances maintaining necessary pleasantries. "Hello, Lucy. Are you ready for our afternoon together?" She nodded and grabbed her backpack, which I knew contained her phone with GPS tracking and emergency contacts programmed in. Trust would be a long time coming if it ever came at all. "I'll have her back by 6, Marcus said to me, his tone respectful in a way it had never been during our marriage. After they left, I sat in the quiet house reviewing my nursing school materials. The prerequisites I'd needed to complete had been challenging but manageable, and I'd surprised myself by earning A's in anatomy, chemistry, and psychology. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "How's my college girl doing today?" Dad had stayed for 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, helping us transition and making sure Marcus understood the permanence of the new arrangements. He'd connected us with excellent legal representation, helped us install a security system, and made it clear to everyone in town that his daughter and granddaughter were under his protection. The legal proceedings had been swift and decisive. Marcus' family, faced with the reality of documented abuse and potential criminal charges, had pressured him to accept the divorce terms without contest. They distanced themselves from the situation completely, and we hadn't heard from any of them since the papers were signed. I texted back, "Starting clinical rotations next month. Your granddaughter helped me pick the best program." His response was immediate. "That girl is going to run the world someday, just like her mother." For the first time in 7 years, I was beginning to believe that might be true. 3 years after that Thanksgiving dinner, I'm sitting in my graduation cap and gown, watching Lucy beam with pride from the audience as I crossed the stage to receive my nursing degree. At 12, she's grown into a poised young woman who carries herself with the confidence of someone who knows she can handle whatever life throws at her. The wooden box where she once stored her evidence now holds different treasures. Awards from school, photos from our travels to visit my father, and letters from other children who've reached out after hearing her speak at conferences. But she still keeps those original recordings stored securely in multiple locations, just in case. She tells me when I ask why she maintains such detailed backup systems. And because other kids need to know that documentation works, that adults will listen if you have proof. She's become something of a legend in child advocacy circles. The 9-year-old who outsmarted a room full of abusive adults and created a blueprint for other children in similar situations. Schools now invite her to train teachers on recognizing signs of domestic violence, and she speaks with the authority of someone who's lived through the unthinkable and emerged stronger. Marcus fulfilled his legal obligations for exactly 18 months before violating the restraint order. He'd been drinking, a problem that had worsened after his family disowned him, and decided to confront me at the hospital where I was doing my clinical rotations. Security cameras captured everything, and my father's friends ensured he understood that his second chance had been his last chance. He served 2 years in prison and moved to another state after his release. His support payments now come through a court-administered account, and we haven't seen him since Lucy's 10th birthday. When he sent a card, she threw it away unopened. His family scattered like leaves after the scandal. Patricia moved to Florida to live with her sister, claiming the stress had damaged her health. Monica remarried and moved to California, desperate to distance herself from the family name. Uncle Pete died of a heart attack a year later, and Robert's insurance business never recovered from the reputational damage. The house that once felt like a prison has become our sanctuary. Lucy and I host study groups here now, she for her accelerated academic program, me for my nursing board certification prep. The dining room where I was humiliated now echoes with laughter and animated discussions about literature, science, and Lucy's newest passion, law. I want to be a prosecutor, she announced recently. Specifically, I want to handle domestic violence cases. She's already volunteering with the county attorney's office, helping them understand how to interview child witnesses and collect digital evidence. At 12, she's more technologically sophisticated than most adults, and she uses those skills to help other children document unsafe situations. Mrs. Stanley, now retired, stops by regularly for tea and updates on our lives. She takes quiet pride in the role her family dynamics assignment played in our liberation, though she's careful not to take credit for Lucy's remarkable courage and strategic thinking. Some children are born with an innate sense of justice, she told me recently. Lucy just needed the tools to act on it. My father visits every few months, still protective, but no longer worried. He's proud of the woman I've become, the nurse who specializes in trauma care, the mother who raised a daughter capable of changing the world, the person who transformed victimization into purpose. You know, Lucy said to me yesterday as we reviewed college brochures. Yes, college brochures for a 12-year-old who's been accepted into a prestigious early admission program. I used to be angry that Daddy put us through all that. And now, she considered the question with the thoughtfulness that has always made her seem older than her years. Now I think maybe it was necessary, not because we deserved it, but because surviving it made us who we are. And who we are helps other people. That's my daughter's legacy. Not just her own escape from an impossible situation, but her commitment to ensuring other children don't have to endure what she endured. She's turned her childhood trauma into a superpower, her survival skills into advocacy tools. As for me, I'm a registered nurse now, working in pediatric emergency care, where I help other families navigate their darkest moments. I see Lucy's influence in every case I handle, her voice in every safety plan I help create. We're not the same people we were that Thanksgiving morning when everything changed. We're stronger, wiser, and utterly unashamed of the journey that brought us here. Sometimes Lucy still pulls out her tablet and pretends to record family conversations. But now it's a game, a reminder of how far we've come. The little girl who once documented abuse to save her family is now a young woman documenting success, joy, and the infinite possibility that opens up when you refuse to accept that suffering is your only option. We survived. We thrived. And we're making sure others can do the same. That's how this story ends. Not with revenge, but with transformation. Not with bitterness, but with purpose. Not with silence, but with the knowledge that sometimes the smallest voice in the room can change everything. Now on to the next story. Story 2. My sister kicked me out while I was pregnant, and my parents took her side, so I stopped paying their mortgage. Hey there. I am a 33-year-old woman raising my lovely 5-year-old daughter on my own. Life hasn't been the easiest, especially since things with her dad didn't go well. While I was pregnant, and even after our daughter was born, he wasn't faithful to me. It hurt a lot, but after she came into the world, I knew I had to take control, so I ended the relationship and kicked him out. That's a story for another day, though. Right now, let me tell you about what's been happening with my family, specifically my sister. After the breakup, I moved back in with my parents. Let's face it, being a single mom is hard, and having family around to help can make a world of difference. For a while, things were manageable. I was working, and my parents helped out here and there, although not as much as they had promised. But everything changed just a couple of days ago when I came home to find my younger sister, Ava, sitting in the living room. Ava is 29. And the first thing I noticed was her huge pregnant belly. She had moved to Croatia with her husband right after they got married, and I hadn't seen her since. You'd think I'd be happy to see her, but that's complicated. Ava and I have never really gotten along. She's always acted like she's better than me, and she's made it her mission to turn our parents against me whenever she can. Being the younger sibling, she's always played the innocent card, getting away with pretty much anything. Ava isn't just mean with her words. She's physically intimidating, too. She's bigger and stronger than me, and there were times growing up when I genuinely felt threatened by her. But my parents, they were blind to it all. Every time I tried to tell them that Ava was bullying me or even getting physical, they brushed it off, saying, "She's your little sister. How could she possibly hurt you?" That's how it's always been. I learned to keep my distance from Ava. When I moved out for high school, it felt like escaping a prison. But now she's back, and not just for a visit. She's back for good. When I saw her sitting there, I was taken aback. I hoped she was just back to have her baby and then leave again. I cautiously asked my mom how long Ava was planning to stay. Before my mom could even answer, Ava yelled from the living room, "I'm here to stay. Do you have a problem with that?" Her tone was sharp, and it was immediately clear that she hadn't changed one bit. Still the same self-centered, narcissistic person she's always been. My mom told me Ava's husband had gotten a transfer back to the States, and though he had company accommodation, they thought it was best for Ava to stay with our parents during her pregnancy and after the baby was born. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. When I had my daughter, I didn't get half the support Ava was getting. I asked my mom if she really had the time to take care of Ava's child, and she replied meekly, "Well, she's still so young. How could she raise a child on her own?" Ava is 29. She's not young. I was 27 when I had my daughter, and I handled most of the postpartum on my own because my husband wasn't around. My mom didn't come to help me then, telling me it was just something I needed to learn as part of motherhood. But here she was, bending over backward to help Ava, cooking for her, bringing her supplements, and making her as comfortable as possible. I was furious but kept my cool. The favoritism was always obvious, but this took it to another level. For years, I kept my distance from Ava because of it, and now here I was living in the same house as her again. But this time, it wasn't just me I had to think about. It was my daughter. When I separated from my husband, I rented my own place at first, but my dad insisted I move in with them. He said their house was too big for just the two of them and that they could help with my daughter when I was at work. It seemed like a fair deal. Instead of paying rent for my own place, I could pay rent to my parents and save a bit of money. Plus, I was going through a lot emotionally at the time. Pregnancy, postpartum, my husband's infidelity, so I accepted their offer. First, it was fine. I paid rent, and my mom agreed to babysit my daughter occasionally, though not as often as she had promised. Most of the time, I had to hire a full-time nanny because my mom said she couldn't babysit full-time. So instead, she played the role of a baby monitor, making sure the nanny was doing her job properly. It wasn't ideal, but I was grateful to have her around to keep an eye on things. But now, seeing how she was catering to Ava, doing everything for her while I had to hire help and take care of everything on my own during my pregnancy, it was too much to handle. My mom had barely visited me when I was pregnant, but for Ava, she was practically her personal nurse. I knew something was up. My parents had agreed to let Ava move in permanently, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were plotting something. Our house wasn't that big to accommodate everyone comfortably. I knew I couldn't just move out on a whim. I was paying rent and I relied on my parents to help keep an eye on my daughter, even though they weren't the best at it. I wasn't ready to leave her with a nanny all the time, especially without the safety net of having family nearby. Then my worst fears came true. A few days after Ava moved in, I came home from work tired but ready to spend some time with my daughter. As soon as I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. My heart sank when I saw my stuff, suitcases, boxes, and bags, sitting on the front porch. And there, sitting on the steps next to the pile, was my daughter. She was hugging her knees, looking small and scared, waiting for me. I rushed over, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's going on, sweetie?" I held her tightly, feeling my heart sink and my stomach churn with anger and disbelief. My daughter was terrified, and I had to stay strong for both of us, even though everything inside me was falling apart. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts as I stroked her hair and helped her stand. With blood boiling, I grabbed our belongings and marched into the house, determined to find out what was going on. As soon as I opened the door, there she was, Ava sprawled out on the couch, a smug grin on her face, eating like nothing had happened. My mother was in the kitchen pretending she hadn't noticed anything, and my father sat in his armchair, glued to the TV as if my daughter and I didn't exist. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice low but seething with rage. "Why is my stuff outside?" Ava chuckled sarcastically, not even looking up from her phone. "We needed more space. It's not like you're irreplaceable." My mom emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel, her voice colder than I ever thought possible. "You always knew you couldn't stay here forever. Ava is pregnant and needs peace and space. You're an adult, sweetheart. You'll figure it out." Felt like a punch to the gut. I'd been paying rent, helping around the house, and now they were tossing me out without a warning. "You're kicking me out?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Me and my daughter, after everything I've done for you?" "Ava needs support," my father muttered, not even glancing in my direction. "And that's what we're doing." Ava, of course, was loving every second. The smug look on her face made me sick. She'd gotten exactly what she wanted, me out of the picture, as if I were nothing but a burden. I knew there was no point in arguing. They wouldn't listen to reason, and any plea for fairness would fall on deaf ears. I took my daughter's hand, grabbed our things, and walked out of the house I once thought was a home. But I wasn't going to let this go. In the following days, I contacted the bank to inform them that I would no longer be paying the mortgage on my parents' house. The loan was in my name, and without my money, they'd be in trouble. At the same time, I hired a lawyer to make sure they couldn't legally evict me without proper notice, adding more complications for them. Meanwhile, I found a small apartment to rent. It wasn't much, but it was ours, and my daughter could finally sleep peacefully without the fear of being kicked out again. A few weeks later, the inevitable happened. My parents received notice that their house was going into foreclosure. My mom called me hysterical, begging me to reconsider. She said I was being cruel, that Ava couldn't handle so much stress during her pregnancy. Stress? I laughed bitterly. "And what about what you did to me and my daughter?" That didn't matter. There was silence on the other end of the line, as if she finally realized the weight of what they'd done to us. But it was too late. I was done. Ava tried reaching out too, but I ignored every text, every call. They were reaping what they had sown. In the end, the house was sold, and my parents had to move into a small apartment. Ava and her husband were forced to live on their own without the luxury they had expected. As for me, I moved forward. I found a better job, saved money, and built a new life for my daughter and me. It was just the two of us now, and that was more than enough. And whenever anyone from the family tried to guilt-trip me or ask for help, I would smile and say calmly, "You made your choices. Now live with them." And that's how I found my peace and proved to everyone that no one walks all over me and gets away with it. The months passed, and with each day, I felt the weight of the past melt away as I rebuilt my life. My apartment wasn't big, but it was cozy, and most importantly, it was ours. My daughter thrived in that safe, loving space without the pressure from my family. I found a peace I never thought possible. The silence was therapeutic, and the certainty that no one could humiliate me again gave me strength. Slowly but surely, I started to smile for real. I found a new job, one that paid better and offered the flexibility I needed to care for my daughter. I saved up, and before long, I moved us into a larger apartment in a quiet neighborhood with a good school nearby. For the first time in years, I felt hopeful about the future. I was at peace, but I couldn't avoid hearing bits and pieces about what had become of my parents and Ava. They were hitting rock bottom, and to be honest, I felt no pity. After losing their house, my parents moved into a modest apartment in a less than ideal part of town. My dad's pension barely covered the bills, and my mom had to take a job as a cashier at a pharmacy to make ends meet. Her arrogance quickly faded when she realized she would have to fight to survive. As for Ava, things were even worse. Without the luxury and support she expected, she faced a harsh reality. Her husband didn't take kindly to the stress of being their sole provider, and they fought constantly. Ava thought that moving back to the US would be a blessing, but soon discovered that things wouldn't be as easy as she imagined. With my parents struggling, Ava had to care for her baby on her own, and unsurprisingly, after just a few months, her husband walked out. She was abandoned just as I had been, but the difference was she never knew how to be strong on her own. Instead of rising to the challenge, Ava wallowed in self-pity, flooding social media with posts about how unfair life was and how everyone had let her down. She pushed away her friends, blocking the ones who tried to help. Unlike me, Ava didn't have the strength to start over. For a while, she begged for help from our parents, but they were drowning in debt and couldn't afford to support her any longer. And that's when they came to me. My mother called, her voice trembling with desperation, telling me how much Ava needed me, how I was the only one who could help her. "Please, sweetheart, she's in such a bad place." My mom pleaded, her voice cracking. "You don't know what it's like to see your child suffer. She needs support now more than ever." I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of anger and satisfaction. Where was this compassion when I needed it? Where was this concern when they threw me and my daughter out? "No," I said calmly and firmly. "You made your choices. Now live with them." My mother sobbed about family and forgiveness, but I hung up before she could finish. I didn't have room in my life for people who only cared when they were desperate. The calls stopped after that. I later heard through distant relatives that Ava ended up moving into a shelter with her baby, and my parents were selling their furniture to pay off debts. They had burned every bridge they could have crossed for help. Meanwhile, I thrived. My job was going better than ever. I was saving money and I had built a new life for me and my daughter. It was just the two of us, and it was more than enough. I went back to school, took classes, and threw myself into hobbies I never had time for before. With every new achievement, I felt myself becoming the person I was meant to be before all the chaos. On weekends, my daughter and I explored parks, museums, and took small trips to new places. We didn't need much, just each other and the certainty that the worst was behind us. Seeing her eyes light up with happiness made me realize that all the pain had been worth it, because in the end, we emerged stronger. Sometimes I would reflect on the past, but not with sadness or anger. Instead, I felt grateful that they had thrown me out because it forced me to discover my own strength. Grateful for the betrayals because they taught me never to settle for less than I deserve. And most of all, grateful that I found the courage to leave behind those who never valued me. Ava, my parents, and everyone else who wronged me were now struggling to survive while I flourished. And me? I didn't offer them a single crumb of help, not even a polite "I'm sorry." Life has a funny way of paying people back, and I learned that the best revenge is living well and in peace. And so, I moved forward, each day lighter and happier, while those who had tried to break me dealt with the consequences of their actions. Now on to the next story. Story 3. I was 29 years old the night I sat alone in my brand new office, sweeping confetti off the floor that nobody had walked on. The place still smelled of fresh paint and new carpet. I had spent months obsessing over every detail, from the glass-paneled conference room to the espresso machine in the kitchen. This was supposed to be the biggest night of my life, the grand opening of my company, something I had been working toward for nearly a decade. And yet, the chair sat empty. The food I had catered was untouched, except for the lonely plate I ate just so it wouldn't go to waste. My name's James, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the responsible one in my family. The one who kept the peace, who showed up for every birthday, who lent money even when it meant eating noodles for a month. My younger brother, Kyle, was always the golden boy. Anything he did, no matter how reckless, was somehow framed as ambitious, charismatic, or just Kyle being Kyle. When he dropped out of college after 2 semesters to find himself, my parents proudly announced that he was entrepreneurial. When he burned through 3 jobs in a year, they said he just hadn't found his passion yet. Meanwhile, I quietly put myself through school, worked double shifts at a warehouse, and lived in a studio apartment that barely fit a bed and a desk. Every dollar I saved went toward this dream. Starting my own company, not a side hustle, not a passion project, a real, legal, registered company with employees and office space. Something that would last. So, when I finally signed the lease and opened the doors, I thought my family would be proud. I sent out digital invites weeks in advance, even printed a few physical ones for my parents because I knew they'd say they never saw the email. I arranged for champagne, music, a little speech to thank everyone who supported me. At 6 p.m., I stood by the entrance in my one good suit, waiting for the first familiar face to walk in. At 6:15, I told myself they were just running late. At 7 o'clock, I refreshed my phone. No calls, no texts. No, we're on our way. At 8 o'clock, I quietly told the caterer they could pack up the leftovers. I didn't cry. I just sat at one of the desks, sipping warm champagne from a plastic flute, staring at the empty lobby. The room echoed with every sound. All I could think was, after everything I've done for them, they couldn't even bother to show up for one night. Then my phone buzzed. It was a photo in the family group chat. Kyle and my parents were standing in front of a brand new barbecue grill, laughing, holding drinks. The caption read, "Housewarming success." I stared at it for a long time. No. Sorry we couldn't make it. No. Congratulations, James. Nothing. Just a casual broadcast that they had all chosen Kyle's housewarming over my grand opening without a second thought. I didn't reply. Couldn't. My stomach twisted, but part of me wasn't even surprised. I cleaned up the last of the decorations, turned off the lights, and went home. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Mom. "We need to talk about profits. Your brother says he deserves a cut." I just sat there staring at the screen, my coffee going cold. My brother deserved a cut of what? He hadn't invested a cent, hadn't lifted a finger, hadn't even shown up to the launch. My company hadn't even made $1 yet. But suddenly, Kyle was entitled to part of it. I didn't answer right away. I just felt this wave of exhaustion, not just from the night before, but from years of being taken for granted. I could already picture how the conversation would go. Mom insisting that family comes first. Dad saying that Kyle needs this more than you do. Kyle probably sending me a list of reasons why his contribution, whatever that was, justified a percentage. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something in me harden. That text wasn't just a request. It was a warning shot, and I had a choice. Roll over like I always did, or do something different this time. I put my phone down, poured myself another coffee, and started thinking. And that's when I realized, maybe for the first time in my life, that I wasn't as powerless as they thought I was. I didn't reply to Mom's text that day or the next. Instead, I watched the group chat light up with more photos of Kyle's housewarming, more inside jokes I wasn't part of. Each one just added fuel to the quiet fire building in my chest. By the end of the week, Mom sent another message. "James, answer your phone. This is important." I did answer eventually, and what I said next made her go completely silent. When I finally picked up the phone, Mom launched into her usual routine. "No, hello? No, how are you?" Just a clipped, "James, we've been trying to reach you for days." I stayed quiet for a beat longer than usual, just enough for her to notice. "What's going on?" she pressed, as if I was the one acting strangely. "You're asking me about profits?" I said slowly, choosing each word carefully. "But not one of you showed up to my company's launch." There was a pause, a long one. I pictured her standing in her kitchen, hand on her hip, already annoyed at being challenged. "James," she finally said, in that patient but condescending tone she used when I was a kid. "You know how important Kyle's housewarming was. Everyone was there. It wouldn't have been right to split up the family over one night." "One night," I repeated. My voice came out flatter than I expected. This wasn't a dinner party. This was my business launch. Something I've worked toward for years. She sighed like I was the one being dramatic. "You're overreacting. Kyle is just starting his life with Emily, and you'll have plenty of other events. Now, about the profits." I actually laughed at that. A sharp, humorless sound that made her go silent for a second. "Profits? Mom, I haven't even finished onboarding my first clients yet. There are no profits." "Well, Kyle was saying that since he inspired you to start the company, He should get some sort of founder's share, or at least a family discount since he wants to use your services for his own projects. That stopped me cold. Inspired me? I asked, incredulous. Mom, I've been planning this since college. Kyle didn't even know what I was working on until last month. She kept talking, completely ignoring my point. Look, your brother is trying to build his life. You're single. You don't have kids. You can afford to be generous. Think of this as helping the family. Helping the family. That line again. I told her I had to go and hung up before she could say anything else. That was the moment I realized this wasn't going to blow over. My parents didn't see my company as mine. They saw it as the family's new resource. And Kyle was first in line with a plate, ready to take whatever he wanted. Over the next few weeks, it just got worse. Kyle texted me directly one afternoon. Hey bro, I was thinking, can you hook me up with a partnership package? Like, I'll promote your company to my friends, and in return, you give me a lifetime free account. Fair. I stared at the message, baffled. He had never promoted anything in his life except his own parties. When I didn't reply right away, he sent another. Mom said you'd probably say yes. Just let me know what I need to post. That's when I decided I wouldn't respond at all. A day later, Mom called again. James, why are you ignoring your brother? He's trying to help you grow your business. I asked her very calmly if she understood that what Kyle was asking for was essentially free labor. She brushed it off. It's just family. You're making such a big deal out of nothing. But the group chat told a different story. One night, Kyle sent a photo of his new patio furniture, writing, "Thanks, Mom and Dad, for the loan." Another relative replied, "What about James? Didn't he just launch something?" Kyle, "Yeah, but he's being super weird about money lately." Mom chimed in, "He's stressed. He'll come around." They were having entire conversations about me, about my money, my company, without me right in front of me. Then came the kicker, an invitation to Kyle's networking barbecue. "You should come," Mom said brightly when she called to follow up. "Lots of people there could be good for your business." I asked who was going to be there. "Oh, just some of Kyle's friends, people from his gym, Emily's family. Bring some business cards." I almost laughed. They skipped my launch, but now I was supposed to show up at Kyle's party and beg his friends for business. I didn't go. And that night, they sent a group picture of the whole family standing around the grill, captioned, "So much fun. We missed you, James." Though, "We missed you," stung more than I expected, like it was my fault for not playing along with their narrative. The final straw came 2 weeks later. I got an email from my accountant saying that someone using my mother's email address had inquired about adding a family partner to my company's banking account. They didn't have access, of course, but just the fact that they had tried made my stomach drop. I called Mom immediately. "Oh, that," she said, sounding annoyed. "I was just trying to make things easier for you. This way, Kyle could handle some of the finances and take the stress off your plate." I was quiet for a long time. "James," she started. "Don't ever do that again," I said finally. My voice was low, steady. "You don't touch my accounts. You don't ask about my accounts. This company is mine." She huffed. "You don't have to be so territorial. We're just looking out for you." But I didn't believe that anymore. I hung up and sat in my office for a long time, staring out the window. The city below was alive with people living their lives, making their own choices. And here I was, letting my family make me feel like a child. For the first time, I started thinking seriously about what it would mean to set boundaries, real boundaries. Not just saying no once, but actually making sure they couldn't take from me again. The very next day, Kyle sent me a new text. "Bro, did you see the new patio heater I bought? You should come check it out. Also, when are we getting that family discount? Dad said you're being stingy." Something in me shifted. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop, logged into every single account with my name on it, joint streaming services, shared utilities, even the old family phone plan, and started making a list. Because if they thought they were entitled to everything I had built, they were about to find out just how wrong they were. And I wasn't going to warn them this time. 2 weeks passed. I was busy onboarding my first real clients, spending long nights at the office, drinking too much coffee, living off takeout, and honestly feeling proud of myself. For a moment, I thought the family drama might cool off if I just stayed quiet and focused on my work. But then came the weekend that flipped everything. It was a Saturday morning, and I had planned to sleep in for the first time in weeks. Around 7:30 a.m., my phone started buzzing relentlessly. First a call from Mom, then Dad, then Kyle, then Mom again. I groaned, rolled over, and ignored it. A minute later, a notification popped up from my company's internal dashboard. A flagged access attempt. Someone was trying to log in from an unknown device. I sat straight up in bed. I opened my laptop and checked the logs. Sure enough, there had been 3 failed login attempts from an IP address that was suspiciously close to my parents' neighborhood. Someone had been trying to get into my business account, and not just casually. They were guessing passwords. My stomach dropped. I called Mom immediately. "Oh, good. You're awake," she said cheerfully, as if this was a normal Saturday morning. "We were just talking about how to get you some help. Kyle and I were thinking you're working too hard, and if we had access to some of the systems, we could process payments for you, maybe keep track of client invoices." "You tried to log in?" I said flatly. Silence. "You tried to get into my company account?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Well, yes, but only because you've been so secretive lately," she said defensively. "We thought maybe you were overwhelmed. This way, we could." "You had no right," I snapped. "None. You don't touch my company. You don't even ask before doing something like that." She sounded offended. "James, you're making it sound like we're criminals. We're your family. We just want to help." "Help?" I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Mom, you skipped my launch. You gossip about me in the group chat. You demand money I don't have. And now you try to break into my accounts. That's not help." She sniffed, and her voice got that sharp edge I knew so well. "You're being ungrateful. Your father and I raised you, supported you through school, and this is the thanks we get? Locking us out." I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to breathe. "You didn't pay for my school, Mom, I did. You didn't support me when I was saving for this company. You barely even knew what I was doing until I signed the lease." "That's not the point," she said coldly. "This family shares everything. You've been acting like you're better than us, hoarding your success. It's selfish." I didn't trust myself to say anything else. I just hung up. 10 minutes later, Kyle texted me, "Really, dude? Mom says you yelled at her. Chill. She was just trying to make sure you don't mess anything up. Also, I already told Emily we'd get that family plan discount, so don't make me look bad." I put the phone down, shaking. That was the moment I realized it wasn't just a boundary issue anymore. They genuinely believed they were entitled to what I had built. By Monday, it escalated again. I got to my office and found an envelope shoved under the door. Inside was a letter handwritten from my father. "James, we've been patient with you, but your attitude lately is unacceptable. Your mother and I have talked, and we think it's time you start giving back to the family in a real way. We propose a family stipend. 15% of your monthly revenue to be distributed fairly between your parents and your brother. Consider this a way of honoring where you came from." I sat there in my office, gripping the letter so hard the paper crinkled. My father, the man who hadn't even bothered to attend the most important night of my career, was now formally requesting a cut of my revenue. Not profits, revenue before expenses, before salaries. It was so absurd I almost laughed. But the laugh caught in my throat because I knew they were serious. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about every time I had bailed Kyle out of trouble. The time I covered his rent when he blew his paycheck on a business opportunity. The time I co-signed a loan so he could buy a car, only for him to miss 3 payments and tank my credit score. The time Mom called me crying because Kyle had gotten into a fight at a bar and needed money for legal fees. Every single time I had shown up, and this was how they repaid me. By trying to worm their way into my livelihood before it had even had a chance to grow. The next weekend was the final nail in the coffin. I was out with a friend grabbing lunch when I got a notification that my company's office alarm had been triggered. My stomach lurched. I rushed back to the building and found my brother standing outside the office door, fiddling with the keypad. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice echoing in the hallway. He jumped, looking guilty for half a second before plastering on a grin. Relax, man. Mom said you wouldn't mind if I grabbed a few things. I told Emily I'd show her around your office. You tried to break in? I said, my voice cold. It's not breaking in if it's family, he said with a shrug, as if that was the most reasonable thing in the world. I just stared at him for a second. I didn't even know what to say. You need to leave, I finally said, each word measured. He scoffed. Wow, really? You think you're too good for us now? I stepped closer, lowering my voice. If you ever try to get into this office again without my permission, I will call the police. His grin faltered. You wouldn't. Try me. He left, muttering something under his breath. When the door shut behind him, I locked it and just stood there, my hands trembling. That was it. That was the line. They had crossed from disrespect into outright violation. For the rest of the weekend, I didn't answer a single call or text. I sat at my desk going over every single system I had, business accounts, personal accounts, security settings, and started tightening everything down because I knew now that this wasn't just about boundaries. This was war. And if they wanted to treat my company like their personal ATM, they were about to find out what it meant when I shut the door for good. The Monday after catching Kyle at my office, I woke up feeling like I had been hit by a truck. My body wasn't sore. It was my chest, my stomach, my head. Everything felt heavy. I sat at the edge of my bed for a long time, staring at my phone as it buzzed over and over. Mom called twice, then Dad, then Kyle, then Mom again. Each one leaving voicemails that got angrier by the hour. James, Mom's voice snapped on the latest one. Your brother said you threatened to call the police on him. This is ridiculous. You need to apologize before this family falls apart completely. I didn't listen to the rest. I deleted it, stood up, and walked to the kitchen. I made coffee on autopilot and sat down at the table, just staring at the steam curling out of the mug. For years, my family had been my safety net, even if they were dysfunctional. They were loud, entitled, and manipulative, but they were still my family. And I had been trained since childhood to put their feelings first, to keep the peace. But now, keeping the peace was eating me alive. I barely noticed when tears started running down my face. Not loud, sobbing tears, just quiet, hot ones that blurred my vision until I had to set the mug down so I wouldn't spill it. I didn't cry often. I had trained myself not to. But that morning, I felt hollow, like all the energy I had poured into building this dream had been drained by the very people who were supposed to celebrate it. I called in sick to the office that day. My assistant covered for me while I sat on the couch with my laptop, not working, not watching TV, just staring. At one point, I opened the family group chat, scrolled all the way back, and reread months of messages. Every sarcastic joke at my expense. Every time Kyle was praised for doing the bare minimum. Every time my parents brushed off my achievements like they were no big deal. And as I read, something started to shift. At first, it was just anger, sharp and bitter. But underneath the anger, there was this deep ache. I had bent over backwards to earn their approval, to make them proud, and it was never enough. By the end of the day, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to try anymore. The next few weeks were brutal. I started avoiding family events entirely. If Mom called, I let it go to voicemail. If Dad texted, I ignored it. I worked later hours, sometimes sleeping at the office, just so I wouldn't have to deal with seeing them. But the silence didn't make them go away. Instead, they doubled down. Mom showed up at my apartment one afternoon, knocking on the door like she owned the place. When I opened it a crack, she immediately started in. James, this is childish. You can't keep cutting us out just because you're upset. Your brother is hurt. He was only trying to help. Trying to help by breaking into my office? I asked, my voice tired. You're exaggerating, she said, waving a hand. He just wanted to see the space. You should be flattered. He cares enough to get involved. I stared at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel the familiar pull of guilt, just distance. I'm busy, I said, and shut the door before she could respond. I leaned against it, heart pounding, but also feeling something strange, a flicker of relief. The next weekend, I skipped a big family dinner that had been on the calendar for months. Mom sent me 20 texts in a row. Everything from guilt trips, your grandmother was asking about you, to anger, you're embarrassing us by not showing up, to veiled threats. If you keep this up, don't expect us to support you when things get tough. I didn't reply to any of them, but the silence came with a price. Work got harder. I was exhausted all the time, my mind constantly replaying arguments that hadn't even happened yet. I stopped sleeping through the night. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, thinking about Kyle standing at my office door, smirking like it was all a game. I was irritable with my employees, short with friends, even clumsy with small tasks. One night, I stayed at the office until dawn, just running numbers, terrified that I'd miss something critical and the whole business would collapse. And my family would swoop in and say, "See, this is why you needed us." But little by little, something else started forming under all that fear and exhaustion. Clarity. One Friday night, I sat in my office with a notepad and just started writing. Not emails, not work tasks, just a list. I wrote down every account my name was on that my family could access. Every shared bill, every streaming service, every old account that still had Kyle or my parents listed as secondary users. Then I wrote down all the ways they could potentially interfere with my business. From trying to access accounts to calling vendors to showing up uninvited. It wasn't just a to-do list. It was a blueprint, because I realized that if I didn't take control now, this would never stop. I spent the entire weekend acting on that list. I called my bank and added extra security measures. I set up two-factor authentication on every platform. I moved my personal savings to a new account at a different bank. I spoke to my attorney about locking down the company paperwork so no one could make changes without my consent. Each step made me feel a little lighter. By Sunday night, I sat back in my chair, staring at the office ceiling, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Calm. Not happy, not triumphant, but calm. Because for the first time, I wasn't just reacting to what my family did. I was preparing. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Whatever came next, I was going to be ready. And this time, they wouldn't see it coming. It's strange how much lighter the world feels when you finally stop begging for someone else's approval. After that weekend of locking things down, something in me shifted. I stopped waiting for texts from mom or dad, stopped replaying arguments in my head, stopped wondering what they were saying about me in the group chat. Instead, I started focusing on what I could control and what I could build. The next Monday, I came into the office before sunrise. The city was quiet, still waking up, and for the first time in months, I felt excited to be there. I made a fresh pot of coffee, sat down with my notebook, and mapped out the next 3 months of company growth. My first few clients were small, but word of mouth was spreading. One referral led to another, and soon I had meetings lined up with bigger players, the kind of contracts that could stabilize the company's finances for a whole year. And without the constant background noise of my family pulling at me, I was sharper, more focused. One by one, the deals started closing. I remember the first major client I landed, a mid-sized firm that had been shopping around for months. After our final pitch meeting, the CEO shook my hand and said, "James, you clearly care about what you're building. That's why we're choosing you." I walked out of that meeting grinning like an idiot. When the contract came through, I stayed at the office late that night just to run the numbers twice, making sure it was real. When I finally saw the revenue projections, I leaned back in my chair and just stared at the ceiling, a smile creeping across my face. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was growth. And with growth came options. The next few weeks, I invested in better equipment for the office, hired a part-time assistant to handle admin work, and even brought in a consultant to help streamline operations. Each improvement made the business run smoother, freeing up more of my time to focus on strategy. It felt good, better than good, to see something I had poured years of effort into finally thrive. But the best part wasn't the money or the success. It was the confidence. I stopped feeling small when my phone buzzed with a message from Mom or Kyle. I stopped dreading running into them at the grocery store. In fact, I started ignoring them entirely. One afternoon, Mom left me a long voicemail full of sighs and dramatic pauses. "James, this has gone on long enough. Your brother is hurt. Your father and I are hurt. We just want to sit down and figure out a way to work together. Family is supposed to share. I didn't call her back. Instead, I listened to the message twice, calmly deleted it, and went right back to reviewing a new contract that was worth more than my first 3 clients combined. And then something interesting happened. Kyle texted me, not with demands this time, but with a question, "Hey bro, do you know anyone hiring? Things are kind of tight right now." I stared at the screen for a long moment. I could have ignored him. I could have gloated. But instead, I typed back, "No, sorry. Things are busy here." And that was it. The power dynamic had shifted. I didn't need to yell or argue. I didn't need to explain myself. For the first time in my life, I had the freedom to simply not engage. And that silence drove them crazy. The texts started coming more frequently. Kyle asked if I could lend him money to cover rent. Mom asked if I could pay for a family trip they had already booked since they were a little short right now. Dad left me a message saying he'd heard about my new clients and that it was only fair to share some of the success. I didn't respond to any of it. Instead, I kept growing. Within a few months, I had doubled my revenue. I moved the company to a slightly bigger office with more natural light and room to expand. I bought new furniture, upgraded our software, and even hired a junior project manager to take some of the workload off my shoulders. For the first time, I felt like a real CEO. And that's when I started thinking about the next phase. Not just surviving, not just growing, but using my position to protect myself permanently. I set up a separate holding company for my assets, moved my intellectual property into it, and arranged things so that if anyone ever tried to interfere legally, they'd have to go through multiple layers just to figure out what I even owned. I also updated my will, something most people my age don't even think about, making sure everything was locked down and out of reach of anyone who might try to claim a piece of it for the good of the family. Each step made me feel stronger, calmer, and more in control. But the irony was that the more I pulled away, the louder my family got. Mom started sending guilt-laden emails about how she missed her son. Kyle posted vague rants on social media about selfish people who forget where they came from. Dad left messages about needing to talk about the future of the family. At one point, Kyle even showed up outside my office again, but this time he couldn't get in. I had upgraded the security system to require access cards and cameras. I watched him on the feed, pacing, knocking once or twice, then finally leaving. When the alert popped up on my phone that the system had recorded footage, I saved it just in case. Because as proud as I was of how far I had come, I knew one thing for sure. They weren't done. They would try again. And when they did, I wasn't going to just sit there and take it. I was going to be ready, not just to protect what I had built, but to make sure they understood once and for all that they couldn't treat me like this anymore. And for the first time, I felt a strange sort of anticipation because I wasn't just surviving their attacks anymore. I was waiting for them to make the next move so I could finally make mine. By the time spring rolled around, my company was in the best shape it had ever been. I had a small but loyal team, recurring contracts with several mid-sized firms, and enough cash flow that I didn't have to think twice about payroll. The business no longer felt fragile. It felt stable, and that stability gave me the mental space to look at the bigger picture. I wasn't just building a company anymore. I was building a shield. One Friday afternoon, I was going through paperwork with my attorney, signing off on some final protections for the holding company, when he casually asked me, "You mentioned family disputes last time we met. Do you still want to include a clause barring them from ever having financial power over the business?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. He nodded, adding a note to the document. "Good call. You'd be surprised how many disputes we see when a business starts doing well. Families can be complicated." I almost laughed. Complicated was an understatement. After the meeting, I decided to take a long walk through the city. The weather was warm, and for the first time in a while, I let myself slow down and think. That's when I noticed something strange. I hadn't heard from my family in nearly 2 weeks. No texts, no voicemails, no surprise visits. At first, I thought maybe they'd finally backed off, but then I got a call from a mutual acquaintance, a family friend who owned a small accounting firm. "James, I just thought you should know," he said, lowering his voice. Your brother came by my office last week asking questions about how to set up a business partnership, and he mentioned your company by name. I stopped in my tracks. What did he say exactly? He said you'd probably make him a partner soon, but he wanted to get ahead of the paperwork, so it wouldn't take too long. Sounded pretty confident about it. I thanked him for the heads up, hung up, and just stood there on the sidewalk for a minute, letting the anger wash over me. Kyle was planning something, and if I knew my brother, it wasn't going to be small. That weekend, I finally opened the group chat again. Not to respond, just to watch. Sure enough, there it was, Mom. We're thinking of having a family meeting next weekend to discuss some exciting opportunities. Kyle, yeah. Can't wait to share what I've been working on. Dad, James, you should really be there. This could be big for all of us. I put the phone down and felt something shift inside me. For months, I had been on the defensive, blocking them, locking things down, trying to keep them from interfering. But now I had leverage. Because here was the truth. My company was no longer a fragile startup. It was profitable, secure, and thanks to the restructuring, I was the only one with legal authority to make decisions about it. Even if Kyle marched into a lawyer's office tomorrow claiming he was entitled to a share, there was nothing they could do. And the best part? They didn't know that yet. That night, I sat at my desk with a legal pad and started writing. Not just notes this time, plans. I listed every point of contact I still had with my family, every account they could benefit from, every small tie they still had to my life. Then I listed ways to sever each one slowly, strategically, without warning. I also started looking at my company through a new lens. Not just as my livelihood, but as my fortress. What would it take to make it completely unassailable? I upgraded the security system again, this time with biometric access. I had my lawyer draft a document formally excluding any family members from ever being granted shares or voting rights. I even spoke to a PR contact about what would happen if someone tried to drag my company into a public dispute and how we could get ahead of the story. Piece by piece, I was building an environment where my family couldn't touch me. And then something unexpected happened that gave me the final piece of leverage I didn't even know I needed. One of my new clients was a real estate developer, the same one who, as it turned out, was negotiating with my brother for a home improvement contract. During a meeting, the developer casually mentioned Kyle's name, asking if we were related. I kept my face neutral and nodded. "Funny guy," the developer said with a chuckle. "He's trying to get us to front him some money for the job before he delivers. Said he's good for it because his family business is doing so well." My eyebrows went up. Family business? Yeah. He said his brother owns a company that could back him if needed. I didn't correct him. I just smiled faintly and made a mental note because now I had something my brother didn't realize I had. Influence. Quiet, subtle influence. The kind that didn't require yelling or fighting. Just a well-placed word here and there to make sure the truth came out when it mattered. By the time the family meeting rolled around, I was ready. Not just emotionally, but strategically. I had all the documentation proving my sole ownership. I had backups of every security log showing their attempted interference. I had the financial reports that showed exactly how much work I had done to make this company succeed. And most importantly, I had the calm clarity to know that whatever they tried next, I could handle it. The night before the meeting, I sat in my office long after everyone had gone home, looking around at the space I had built from nothing. The polished concrete floors, the soft hum of the server rack in the corner, the faint glow of the city lights outside. This was mine, and tomorrow they were going to learn that lesson one way or another. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face, because the setup was done. All that was left was to let them make their move and then play mine. The family meeting was scheduled for Sunday afternoon at my parents' house. The same house where I'd spent countless holidays sitting at the kids' table while Kyle held court as the center of attention. This time, I didn't feel like a kid walking into enemy territory. I arrived on time, dressed in a suit, calm and collected. When Mom opened the door, her eyebrows shot up. "Well, don't you look formal?" she said, half amused, half wary. "This is a business meeting," I said evenly, stepping inside. Kyle was already at the dining table, leaning back in a chair with a smug little grin. Dad sat at the head, looking serious, as if he was presiding over something official. "Glad you could make it," Dad said. "Let's sit down and talk like adults." I took a seat across from Kyle, who immediately launched into his pitch. "So, here's the deal," he said, spreading out a few papers as if this was his boardroom. "I've got a line on a great project, but I need some capital to get it going. Once it takes off, it'll benefit the whole family. Since your company is doing well, we figured you could front the investment. Just a small percentage of your revenue each month, and we'll consider you an official partner." He leaned back, clearly expecting applause. Mom nodded approvingly. "See, this is what we meant about working together. Everyone contributes. Everyone wins." I let them talk for a few more minutes, just listening, my hands folded on the table. When they finally stopped, waiting for me to agree, I slid a folder across the table. "What's this?" Dad asked. "Documentation," I said calmly. "My company's operating agreement, ownership records, financials. Everything showing that I am the sole founder, shareholder, and decision-maker. And before you ask, no, there will be no partnership, no revenue sharing, no family stipend. This company is mine, legally and permanently." Kyle frowned. "Whoa, what's with the lawyer talk? We're family. You don't have to make it so official." "Yes," I said evenly. "I do. Because the last time we had a casual understanding, someone tried to access my accounts without permission. Someone tried to get into my office. And someone sent me a letter demanding 15% of my revenue as if it was their right." Mom bristled. "That was your father's idea. I have it in writing," I interrupted, my voice firm but quiet. "And if anything like that happens again, I won't hesitate to involve law enforcement." The room went silent. For a long moment, all I heard was the faint ticking of the wall clock. "You wouldn't," Dad said finally, his voice low. "I would," I said simply. "I have security footage, logs, emails, and a lawyer who's fully briefed. This isn't a threat. It's a boundary. You don't cross it again." Kyle snorted, trying to play it off. "You think you're so big now, huh? Just because you're making money." I smiled, not cruelly, just calmly. "No, I think I finally learned that I don't owe you my success, and I definitely don't owe you access to it." Before they could respond, I reached into my bag and pulled out a stack of papers. Termination notices for every shared account and bill that still had my name on it. "These," I said, placing them on the table, "are the last ties between my finances and this family. Phone plan, streaming accounts, insurance policies, all canceled or transferred. Effective immediately." Mom's mouth fell open. "You can't just." "I can," I said. And I did. Kyle's smug expression was gone now, replaced with a flush of anger. "This is ridiculous. You're acting like some kind of dictator. All we wanted was a little help." "You wanted control," I said, meeting his eyes. "And you wanted it without doing any of the work. That ends today." For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was on the defensive. I felt steady. I stood, gathering my folder and slipping it back into my bag. "This conversation is over," I said quietly. "If you'd like to have a relationship with me, it will be on respectful terms. Otherwise, consider this the last time we'll be meeting like this." I walked out of that house without looking back. But the revenge wasn't done. Not yet. Over the next few weeks, I made sure the message stuck. When Kyle tried to name-drop my company to a potential client of his, they called me first to confirm the partnership. I politely informed them there was no partnership and never would be. The deal fell through. When Mom tried to guilt-trip me by sending photos of family gatherings with captions like, "We miss you," I didn't respond. When she finally called to demand an explanation, I said calmly, "I'm busy running a company. You know, the one you all ignored. And I don't have time for manipulation." Word spread fast. Family friends started reaching out not to scold me, but to quietly say they understood. Some even told me they were proud of me for standing up for myself, something I'd never heard from my own parents. And the best part? The more they pushed, the calmer I got. I didn't yell, didn't argue, didn't send long emotional texts. I just enforced my boundaries with quiet consistency every single time. And slowly it started to sink in. The calls became less frequent. The messages grew shorter. The demands stopped entirely because they were finally starting to realize that the old James, the one who would cave under guilt, who would show up with his wallet open just to keep the peace, was gone. And in his place was someone they couldn't manipulate anymore. It didn't happen overnight. For a few weeks, the silence felt almost eerie. No texts, no calls, no sudden knocks on my office door. I thought maybe they'd finally gotten the message, but then the fallout hit. One Friday morning, I was reviewing quarterly projections when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, one of Kyle's contractors. "Sorry to bother you," the man said, "but your brother told us you were his financial backer. We just wanted to confirm before moving forward with materials." I felt that calm, deliberate anger settle over me. "No," I said evenly. "My company does not back any of Kyle's ventures. Please make sure you get everything in writing from him before you start work." The man thanked me, sounding both surprised and relieved. It was clear he'd been burned before. Later that day, Kyle called me furious. "You just cost me a contract," he shouted the second I answered. "No, Kyle," I said, keeping my voice level. "You cost yourself a contract by lying about my company's involvement." "You're such a jerk," he snapped. "Do you know how hard it is out here? You could have just said yes and helped me out." "I don't reward dishonesty," I said simply and hung up. That was the beginning of the unraveling. Within a month, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Kyle had lost 2 more clients. Word had spread that he was unreliable, that he promised financial backing he didn't actually have. Meanwhile, my company kept growing. I signed 2 major new contracts and hired another team member. We moved into a bigger office with an entire floor to ourselves. And then came the family barbecue, the first one I had been invited to in months. Mom called me personally. "James," she said, her tone unusually soft, "we'd really like you to come. Things have been tense. Your father and I want to talk." I debated saying no, but something in me knew this was the moment. When I arrived, the atmosphere was strained. Kyle sat at the picnic table, sullen, picking at his plate. Dad looked tired. Mom looked like she had rehearsed a speech. "James," she began, "we just want to put all this behind us. Family is more important than money." I almost laughed, but I kept my expression calm. "Funny," I said, "because money was the only thing you wanted from me for months." Mom flinched. "That's not fair." "It's completely fair," I said quietly. "You skipped the most important night of my life to go to a housewarming. You tried to get into my accounts. You demanded a percentage of my revenue before I'd even broken even. And when I said no, you tried to guilt me into giving you access anyway." Dad sighed. "We made mistakes, but surely you can forgive." "I can't," I said, cutting him off. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean letting you keep taking." Kyle finally spoke up, his voice sharp. "You think you're better than us now, just because you have money." I turned to him, calm as ever. "No, Kyle. I think I've stopped letting you use me as your backup plan, and you don't like it." He didn't respond. I stood then, taking my time, letting the silence stretch. "Here's the truth," I said, looking at each of them. "I built this company from nothing. I sacrificed years of my life for it. And you didn't just fail to support me, you actively tried to take from me. That ends now. We will not be doing business together. We will not be sharing accounts. If you want a relationship with me, it will be as family, not as shareholders." I started walking toward the gate, then paused, turning back one last time. "And if you ever try to cross that line again to get into my accounts, my office, or my business, I will treat you the same way I'd treat any other trespasser." Their faces were a mix of shock and anger, but nobody said a word. I left without another glance. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not the fragile, quiet kind I used to cling to, but something solid. That night, I sat in my new office, looking out over the city skyline. My team had gone home hours ago. The space was silent, except for the faint hum of the servers. I thought about all the times I had bent over backward for my family, all the times I had sacrificed my own goals to keep them happy. And I smiled because now, finally, they understood. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Mom. "We'll respect your wishes. We just hope someday you'll come back to the family." I didn't reply. Instead, I took a photo of the office. The polished floors, the clean desks, the name of my company glowing on the wall, and sent it to the group chat with a single message. "You had your chance to be part of this. That chance is gone." And then I muted the chat for good. I leaned back in my chair, closed my laptop, and let out a long breath. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was standing outside the family looking in. I felt like I had built a life and a future entirely my own. And this time, no one could take it from me. Now on to the next story. Story 4. I'm Chris, 28 years old, and last night, my life turned upside down in a way I still can't fully process. I was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through job postings on my laptop when my father stormed in like a hurricane. No warning. No, "We need to talk." Just a thick envelope of papers slapped down in front of me so hard my coffee almost tipped over. "You're a failure," he said, his voice sharp and cold. "You have 12 hours to get out. Your brother owns this house now." I just sat there frozen, staring at the papers, not fully registering what I was seeing. Eviction papers, signed, notarized, and ready to go. I'm not new to my dad's outbursts. He's always been a man who measured worth by paychecks and titles. But this was different. This wasn't yelling or some offhand insult about me being behind in life. This was calculated, planned, and he looked almost proud of himself as he stood there watching me read. "Maybe this will finally teach you some responsibility," he sneered. The house we were sitting in was my childhood home. My mom's favorite curtains still hung in the living room windows. My brother and I had built a treehouse in the backyard together when we were kids. It was the one place that had always felt safe, and now I was being told I had less than half a day before it wasn't mine anymore. I asked why, my voice shaky. That was when Dad smirked and said almost casually, "Your brother just bought it from me. He's the owner. Now, consider this a lesson in what happens when you waste your life." For context, my older brother, Mark, has always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Straight A student, star athlete, first in the family to get a master's degree. If Mark sneezed, my dad acted like he'd cured the common cold. I, on the other hand, have always been, well, me, the quieter one, the kid who liked to draw instead of play football, who got decent grades but never shined. After college, I bounced between jobs trying to figure out what I really wanted to do. And for my dad, that was apparently the ultimate sin. I should have been angry, and I was. But what hit me first was the strange, hollow feeling, like my chest had been scooped out. I thought about all the times I'd stayed late helping Dad with house repairs. The birthdays and holidays we'd spent under this roof. The nights I'd fallen asleep on the couch after long shifts because I didn't want to wake anyone up by making noise. None of it mattered to him. I was just expendable. Mark wasn't home when this happened. He's been living with his girlfriend downtown for months, but apparently he swooped in at the perfect time to buy the house, as Dad put it. I could already imagine his smug grin when he'd find out he had the power to kick me out. And here's the thing. I don't think Mark even needed the house. He has a high-paying job, a fancy apartment, and barely even visits this place. This wasn't about practicality. This was about control. I took a deep breath, stood up, and just said, "Okay." Dad seemed almost annoyed that I didn't argue. He told me I had until noon today to pack up and leave, then walked out without another word. I sat back down at the table, staring at those papers for a long time. The anger came later, hot and sharp, making my hands shake. But right then, all I felt was cold. I didn't sleep much. I started packing right away, shoving my clothes into trash bags and stacking boxes of my things in the living room. Every creak of the floorboards made me tense. Every time I heard a car outside, my heart jumped, half expecting Mark to come strolling in early to gloat. I kept replaying Dad's words in my head. "You're a failure." It wasn't just the eviction. It was everything those words carried. Years of disappointment, comparisons, and the unspoken message that no matter what I did, I'd never be good enough. By morning, I had most of my stuff piled by the door. The house felt eerily empty without my things in it, like I was already a ghost. That's when I heard tires crunching on the driveway. A car door slammed, footsteps, and then the sound of the front door unlocking. Mark was here. I wiped my hands on my jeans, trying to steady myself. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Maybe a confrontation, maybe some smug lecture about how this was for my own good. But as the door swung open and he stepped inside, something in his expression shifted the moment he saw me standing there. And that's when I knew this was about to get very, very interesting. Mark didn't even close the door behind him at first. He just stood there on the threshold, keys still in his hand, staring at me like I was some stray animal that had wandered into his new property. He had that look on his face, the one I've seen 100 times, a mix of pity and superiority that always made me feel about 2 feet tall. "Well," he said finally, letting out a little laugh as he stepped inside. "You're still here. Thought Dad told you to clear out last night." I didn't say anything right away. My throat felt dry and I wasn't sure if anything I said would come out calm. My things were stacked by the door in neat piles. My whole life compressed into bags and boxes. And Mark's eyes immediately went to them. "Guess you actually listened for once," he said, sounding almost surprised. "Good. This doesn't have to be ugly, Chris. You just, move out, figure yourself out, and maybe one day you'll thank me for giving you the push you needed." That was the first spark of real anger. The way he said, "thank me," like this was some grand favor he was doing for me. I forced myself to stay still to keep my voice even when I finally answered. "This house was Mom's too," I said. "You really think she'd want me thrown out like this?" Mark shrugged, already making himself at home. He tossed his jacket on the couch like he owned the place, which technically he did now. "Mom's not here, is she? And Dad signed it over. So," he trailed off and gave me a little smirk. "You can't keep living off him forever, Chris. You're 28. Most people have their own place by now." I clenched my jaw. Most people didn't have their father secretly sell the house out from under them to their older brother, either. But saying that wouldn't change anything. And Mark knew it. He was enjoying this, the power shift, the fact that for once he had something tangible over me. He walked around the living room slowly, like he was inspecting it, and I realized with a sick feeling that he was already imagining all the ways he'd change things once I was gone. He stopped by the shelf where I'd kept some old framed photos. Me and him as kids, all 3 of us with Mom before she passed, and picked one up. "You should probably take this with you," he said casually. "I'll be redecorating soon." Something about that hit me harder than the eviction papers had. The idea that he'd just wipe away the last traces of Mom in this house, like she'd never been here. I started to read, then stopped, shaking my head. "Wow, you don't waste any time, do you?" Mark turned to look at me with that fake calm smile that always came out before he said something cutting. "Chris, this place needs a refresh. You've been stuck here like a ghost for years. It's time to let go. You can't hold on to the past forever." I wanted to tell him that this house was more than walls and furniture, that every corner had memories that kept me grounded, but I knew he wouldn't get it. To him, everything was about appearances, upgrades, moving forward. He never stayed still long enough to sit with loss, to feel grief the way I had after Mom died. Instead, I just asked, "Did Dad tell you to say all this? Or is this just you being yourself?" Mark's smile faltered for a moment, and then he gave a small shrug. "Dad and I just want what's best for you. Look, you've been spinning your wheels for years. This is your chance to actually do something with your life. You should be grateful." Grateful. That word echoed in my head like a bad joke. Grateful for being blindsided. Grateful for losing the only place that still felt like home. Grateful that my father and brother decided, without so much as a conversation, that they knew what was best for me. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. Mark, you've always had everything handed to you. Dad's support, the money, the attention, and now this house. You ever stop and wonder if maybe you didn't earn all of it?" He stiffened at that, his jaw tightening, but he didn't respond right away. Then he said, "You know what? I think you're just jealous. You've always been jealous of me." I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how predictable it was. Jealous? Of you? No, Mark. I'm just tired. Tired of being treated like I'm the family disappointment just because I don't live my life exactly how Dad wants me to. Tired of being compared to you like we're in some competition I never agreed to. He rolled his eyes. Here we go. The victim's speech. That did it. I grabbed one of the boxes by the door, hoisted it up, and marched past him toward my car. If he wanted me gone so badly, fine. I'd go. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break down over it. I made a few trips back and forth, loading up my car while Mark lingered in the living room, occasionally calling out unhelpful comments like, "Don't scratch the walls," and "Be careful with the door frame." He wasn't just watching me leave. He was reveling in it. At one point, I came back inside to grab my sketchbooks and I saw him on the phone with someone. "Yeah, I'll have the locks changed this afternoon," he was saying, glancing at me like he wanted me to hear. Better to get it done before anything happens. That was when the anger boiled over into something sharper. He wasn't just pushing me out. He was erasing me from this house entirely, like I'd never been part of it, like I'd never belonged here in the first place. I took the last of my things out and stood in the doorway for a moment, looking around the house one final time. Mark was sitting on the couch now, scrolling through his phone like nothing had happened. "Guess this is it," I said quietly. He didn't even look up. "Yeah, don't be a stranger." I almost said something then, something I might have regretted, but instead, I just turned and left. My car was packed to the brim. My chest felt tight, and as I drove away, I kept telling myself I was done with them. Done trying to earn their approval. Done letting them dictate what my life should look like. But as the house grew smaller in my rearview mirror, a new thought crept in, cold, steady, and impossible to shake. If they thought I was just going to disappear quietly, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Driving away from that house felt like leaving behind a piece of myself I wasn't sure I'd ever get back. I didn't have a plan, just a car stuffed with boxes and a head full of thoughts that wouldn't stop spinning. I ended up in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner on the edge of town, sitting there long after the engine was off. It was still early, maybe 7 a.m., but the sky was gray and heavy, like it couldn't decide if it wanted to rain or not. My phone buzzed a few times with texts, but I didn't look. I just sat there gripping the steering wheel, breathing in and out until my hands stopped shaking. I didn't want to call anyone. I didn't want to explain what happened or, worse, hear someone tell me, well, it's their house. They can do what they want. So, I started driving again, aimlessly at first, until I found myself pulling into the parking lot of the old storage facility on Maple Street. It was cheap, no questions asked, and I knew I could get a unit month to month. The guy at the counter gave me a look, probably because I looked like I hadn't slept, but handed me the key and lock. Within an hour, everything I owned was stacked inside a concrete room with a metal door. By the time I left, my phone was buzzing again. This time I looked. It was from Dad. "Turn in your house key today. No exceptions. No, how are you? No, let's talk." Just a command. I texted back one word, "Fine," and that should have been the end of it. But a few hours later, when I went back to drop off the key, the betrayal really hit me because this time Mark and Dad were both there waiting. Dad was standing in the kitchen with his arms crossed, that same disapproving frown on his face. Mark was leaning against the counter, looking far too comfortable. There were papers spread out on the table, and for a brief second I thought maybe they'd reconsidered, that maybe they wanted to talk this out. But no, this wasn't an olive branch. "Good. You're here," Dad said flatly. "We need to go over a few things before you leave." I stayed near the door, wary. "What things?" Dad gestured to the table. "Utilities, property taxes, insurance. You're still listed as a secondary on some of these accounts because you've been living here. I want to make sure everything is transferred so there are no surprises." That sounded reasonable enough until Mark chimed in with a grin. "And since you've been using Dad's internet and power all this time, we thought it was fair you cover the last few months' bills before you go." I blinked. Surely, I'd misheard him. "Excuse me?" Dad nodded like this was completely normal. "You've been living here rent-free, Chris. It's only right you settle what you owe." Mark's taking on the property now. He doesn't need to deal with back expenses. Back expenses? Like I'd been freeloading. Like the countless repairs I'd done, the groceries I'd bought, the nights I'd spent keeping this house running while Dad was away on business meant nothing. You've got to be kidding me, I said, my voice low. Mark slid a printed sheet across the table. It's not that bad. A couple $100 for utilities, some upkeep costs Dad covered. Consider it a clean slate. I picked up the paper and my stomach dropped. It wasn't a couple $100. It was nearly $3,000. $3,000 they wanted me to pay before I left. As if I was some tenant who had skipped out on rent. That's insane, I said, tossing the paper back. I don't owe you a dime. I've been maintaining this place for years for free. I fixed the leaky roof last winter, replaced half the appliances, painted the entire downstairs. And that was your choice, Dad interrupted sharply. You chose to do those things instead of getting your life together. You can't expect me to reward you for staying stagnant. I laughed bitterly. Reward me? You mean not throw me out on the street? Dad's face hardened. You have 12 hours. Pay what you owe or I'll consider it theft of services. That was the moment something cracked inside me. Not just anger this time, something deeper. This wasn't just about pushing me out anymore. This was about humiliation. They wanted me to leave broke, small, ashamed. I set the house key on the table slowly. Here's your key, I said, my voice shaking. That's all you're getting from me. Mark frowned, but Dad just shrugged. Suit yourself. But don't come crawling back here when you realize how hard the world is. I turned to leave, but Mark couldn't resist getting in one last jab. You know, he said, smirking, once I finish the remodel, this place is going to be worth twice what Dad sold it to me for. Probably the best investment I've ever made. You really missed out. I stopped in the doorway, gripping the frame so hard my knuckles went white. He wanted me to react. He wanted me to lash out so they could point and say, see, this is why he can't handle life. But instead, I just said quietly, good luck, Mark. Hope it was worth it. I walked out and didn't look back. But as soon as I was in the car, the tears came, hot, angry, unstoppable. I wasn't crying because I'd lost the house. I was crying because I'd finally realized the truth. It wasn't just the house they didn't want me to have. It was a place in this family. I spent that night sleeping in my car outside the storage facility. I couldn't bring myself to call friends or look for a motel. I just sat there under the hum of the streetlight, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. My dad's words, Mark's smug grin, the $3,000 bill, the way they looked at me like I was nothing. By the next morning, something had shifted. The hurt was still there, raw and sharp. But beneath it was something else. A slow, simmering resolve. If they thought they'd broken me, they were wrong. If they thought I was just going to disappear quietly, they were really wrong. And then, just as I was about to start the car and look for somewhere to shower, my phone buzzed again. This time with a notification that made my blood run cold. A bank alert. I opened it and my stomach flipped. There was a withdrawal I didn't recognize. Nearly $1,200 gone from my checking account. I immediately called the bank. After a few minutes on hold, the representative came back and confirmed it. The payment had gone through last night for shared household expenses, automatically debited from the joint account I'd been forced to share with Dad years ago when he helped me get a credit card. He'd used my own money to pay part of that bill. That was it. That was the breaking point. The last thread of trust snapped clean in two. When I hung up the phone, I just sat there gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands hurt until the sun came up. The betrayal wasn't just complete. It was weaponized. And I knew right then that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Rock bottom didn't hit me all at once. It crept in quietly, like fog rolling over a field at dawn. I left the bank parking lot that morning, feeling hollow, numb. The car smelled faintly of stale fast food from the night before, and the back seat was crammed with my life in boxes and bags. I drove aimlessly for a while until I ended up at the edge of town, parked near the river. The air was damp and chilly, but I rolled down the window anyway. It felt good to feel something, even if it was just the sting of cold air on my face. I spent most of that day sitting there staring at the water and trying to piece together what the last 48 hours had done to me. My childhood home gone. My dad's respect, if he'd ever had any for me, shattered. My brother, a stranger wearing a familiar face. And now they'd taken money straight from my account without even asking. I tried to distract myself by scrolling through job postings again, but every listing I saw felt like a mountain I didn't have the strength to climb. Most wanted a stable address, references, sometimes even credit checks. I had none of that now. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. Eventually, I drove to the cheapest motel I could find. A 2-story place with flickering neon lights and a front desk clerk who didn't even look up from her crossword puzzle when I checked in. The room smelled faintly of bleach, but it had 4 walls, a bed, and a shower, and that was enough. The first night, I slept for nearly 14 hours. When I woke up, my body felt like it had been through a war. My phone had more messages, mostly from Dad. Some short, some longer, all with the same tone. "You need to grow up. This is the real world. Take responsibility for once." I didn't reply. Instead, I took a long shower, put on clean clothes, and forced myself to do something productive. I drove to a cafe with free Wi-Fi and spent the entire day researching everything I could about property transfers, eviction rights, and joint bank accounts. The legal jargon was dizzying, but I took notes, slowly starting to see where there might be cracks in what Dad and Mark had done. It wasn't much, just the faintest glimmer of control, but it was enough to keep me from spiraling completely. Still, the days blurred together. I'd wake up late, drive to the cafe or library, send out a few job applications, then go back to the motel and stare at the ceiling until I fell asleep again. Money was draining fast. The savings I had left were just enough to cover a couple more weeks at the motel, maybe a month if I cut back hard. And then came the moment that made me feel truly, fully humiliated. One afternoon, I ran into an old neighbor at the grocery store. She was sweet, one of those people who always waved when she saw me growing up. She looked surprised to see me. "Chris," she said, smiling. "I heard about the house. Mark mentioned you moved out. How are you holding up?" There it was again. Mark talking about me like he was the generous brother who'd helped his poor, lost sibling move on. I forced a polite smile. "I'm okay," I lied. "Just figuring things out." She patted my arm sympathetically. "Well, I'm glad Mark's finally getting a chance to make that house his own. He's so responsible, isn't he? Your dad must be proud." The words landed like a punch. I nodded, made some excuse about having to go, and left. But inside I was boiling. That was when it hit me. They weren't just erasing me from the house. They were rewriting the entire story to the outside world. I was just the screw-up who finally left so the golden child could swoop in and save the family home. That night, back at the motel, I sat on the edge of the bed with my laptop open and my notes spread out in front of me. For the first time, I let myself really think about what I wanted, not just how to survive. Part of me wanted to just disappear, to walk away completely, find a new city, a new life, and never look back. It would be easier than staying here where every street corner had a memory. But then I thought about Mark's smug grin, Dad's words, the money taken from my account, and a different feeling rose up, slow, steady, like coals catching fire. I started looking into more than just property law. I looked up local business records, tax filings, even social media posts. I wasn't sure what I was looking for yet, just that I needed to know everything about Dad, about Mark, about how the house deal had gone down. The more I read, the more pieces started clicking together. There were odd details about the sale, unusually fast processing, a transfer price that seemed lower than market value. That might not mean much by itself, but it was enough to make me wonder. I also found something about the joint account. Legally, my dad wasn't supposed to use it without my consent. Now that I was an adult, that $1,200 withdrawal was potentially disputable. For the first time since this all started, I felt a tiny spark of control return. It didn't make the next few days any easier. I still had to ration every dollar, still slept on a lumpy motel mattress, Still woke up some mornings with that heavy feeling in my chest that made it hard to move. But now I had a notebook full of plans, lists of questions to ask, documents to pull. And every time I thought about giving up, I'd picture Mark standing in that living room, casually talking about changing the locks like I was some trespasser in my own home. I wasn't ready yet, not even close, but something in me had shifted. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was waiting, watching, gathering, because if there was one thing I was sure of now, it was this. They weren't going to get away with it forever. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I got a call that sent my plans into overdrive. A call that changed everything about how I saw my family, the house, and the betrayal I just lived through. The call came late in the afternoon, just as I was packing up my things from the cafe. I almost didn't answer. The number wasn't saved in my phone, but something made me swipe to accept. "Is this Christopher?" A calm, professional voice asked. "Yes," I said cautiously. "This is Allison from Graham and Company Title Services. We just wanted to confirm that you're no longer a secondary signer on the house transfer documents." "Correct." I froze. "Title Services. House transfer." "Wait," I said slowly. "Why would I have been a signer at all?" There was a pause on the line. "Oh, I see. You weren't aware that your name was still listed on the previous title as an inheritor from your mother's estate." I gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles went white. "No," I said. "I definitely wasn't aware." "Well," Allison said carefully, "it was removed during the transfer, but we're required to notify you as a courtesy. We sent a notice by mail." I almost laughed. Of course they sent it by mail, to the house I'd just been thrown out of. I thanked her for the call, hung up, and just sat there for a long time, heart hammering. My name had been on the title, which meant Dad hadn't just sold his house. He'd sold our house, Mom's house, the house that was supposed to be passed down to both me and Mark. And he hadn't said a word about it. The anger that hit me then was different from before. It was cold, sharp, focused. It wasn't just about hurt feelings anymore. This was about something real, something legal. They had gone behind my back to cut me out of something I had a right to. That night, back at the motel, I didn't just take notes. I started making calls. First, I called a lawyer I found online who specialized in probate and inheritance disputes. I didn't have much money, but to my surprise, the consultation was free. I told him everything. The house, the sale, the eviction, the missing money. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. "This doesn't sound right," he said finally. "If your name was on the title, you should have been given the option to sign off or challenge the sale before it was finalized. The fact that you weren't notified could give you grounds to contest the transfer." "Contest it?" I asked, sitting up straighter. "Potentially reverse it," he said. I thanked him, set up an appointment for later that week, and hung up, feeling for the first time in weeks like the ground was steady beneath my feet. And that was just the beginning. Over the next few days, things slowly started to shift. I got a call back from one of the jobs I'd applied for, a local design firm looking for a junior graphic designer. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to get me out of the motel. I aced the interview, got the job, and moved into a small but clean studio apartment within a week. I also disputed the $1,200 withdrawal from my account. The bank put the funds on hold while they investigated, which meant Dad couldn't touch them. Each small victory felt like stacking bricks, building something solid under my feet. I started going to the gym again. Nothing crazy, just running on the treadmill, lifting light weights. And for the first time in months, my reflection in the mirror didn't look so beaten down. My face had color again. My shoulders felt less slumped. Work became a kind of therapy. The design firm was small, with only 8 employees, but the team was welcoming and creative. They treated me like an equal. No comparisons, no subtle digs about potential, just respect. I stayed late most nights, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. And as the weeks went by, I started saving money again. I opened a new bank account, separate from anything Dad had access to, and deposited every spare dollar. Watching the balance grow, even a little at a time, was like watching a lifeline being slowly pulled toward me. But I didn't forget. Every weekend, I met with the lawyer. We gathered documents, title histories, emails. He even managed to get a copy of the house sale agreement, which showed that Dad had sold the property to Mark at a price far below market value. Something that, combined with the lack of my consent, could look very suspicious in court. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about proving that what they did was wrong, that I wasn't just some failure who had been kicked out for my own good. And the more I worked with the lawyer, the more confident I felt. I started posting more of my art online, too, something I'd been too embarrassed to do before. To my surprise, people liked it. A few even commissioned pieces. One of my designs went semi-viral on Instagram, and I got a handful of offers from bigger accounts wanting to collaborate. For the first time in years, I felt like I was building something that was mine. Then, one Saturday morning, I stopped by a coffee shop near my new apartment, and there they were, Dad and Mark, sitting by the window. They saw me before I could turn around. "Chris," Dad called, his voice carrying across the cafe. I hesitated, then walked over. "You look good," Dad said, eyeing me with something that almost looked like surprise. "Heard you got a job. That's good." Mark, on the other hand, just smirked. "Finally growing up, huh?" he asked. I smiled, really smiled, for the first time in front of them in months. "Yeah," I said. "Actually, things are going really well." I didn't say more, but I could see the way Mark's smirk faltered just a little. When I left the cafe, I didn't feel small anymore. I didn't feel like the kid brother who couldn't measure up. I felt like someone standing on equal ground, maybe even taller, because I knew something they didn't. The lawyer was nearly ready to file. The house wasn't just theirs to do with as they pleased. And soon, very soon, they were going to find that out in a way they never saw coming. And this time, I wouldn't be the one standing in the doorway powerless. I'd be the one holding the papers. The real turning point came about 2 weeks later, when my lawyer called me into his office for what he called a strategy session. I'd been expecting just another routine update, maybe more paperwork to sign. But when I sat down across from him, he had a look on his face that told me this wasn't just routine. "I think we're ready," he said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Not just to contest the transfer. We can move to freeze any major renovations or sales Mark might try to make until this is resolved. And there's more." I dug into the financials for the sale. "Your dad underreported the property value by almost 40%. I frowned. "Meaning what, exactly?" "Meaning," he said with a small smile, "that if we take this to court, not only can we argue that your consent was required, but we can make the case that this sale was a fraudulent conveyance, an attempt to move assets unfairly. If the judge agrees, the sale could be voided entirely. The house would revert back to joint ownership between you and your father, the way it was before." My breath caught. For weeks, I'd been preparing myself for the idea that the house was gone forever, that the best I could hope for was some small settlement to make up for being cut out. But this was different. This meant the whole deal could be unwound. "What would happen to Mark?" I asked carefully. "Well," the lawyer said, leaning back, "if the sale is voided, any money he paid for the property would be refunded by your father. He'd no longer own the house. And if he's already made renovations, he might not get reimbursed for those. Essentially, he'd be back to square one." I sat there for a long moment, staring at the folder. A slow, measured calm washed over me. This wasn't just revenge for revenge's sake. This was justice. This was setting the record straight. "Let's do it," I said finally. "File whatever you have to." The next few days were a blur of signatures, notarizations, and filings. The lawyer moved quickly, getting an injunction in place to stop any major changes to the property until the case could be heard. Meanwhile, I kept working at the design firm and quietly building up my life. The commissions online were picking up faster than I expected, and one of my designs was featured on a popular art blog, which brought in a wave of new followers. I started to feel like I had two lives running in parallel. The quiet, stable one I was building day by day, and the storm I was carefully, patiently preparing to unleash. Then came a stroke of luck that felt almost too perfect. One evening, I was at the grocery store near my new apartment when I ran into Mark's girlfriend, Emily. She looked tired, not just physically, but in that way people look when they've been putting up with something for too long. "Hey," she said, managing a small smile. "Didn't expect to see you here." We talked for a few minutes, just polite small talk, until she let out a sigh and said, "You know, Mark's been working on that house nonstop. He's driving himself crazy trying to make it perfect. New floors, new kitchen, even talking about building a deck. He keeps saying it's going to double in value by next year." I bit back a smile. If only he knew. Then Emily hesitated, glanced around, and lowered her voice. "Honestly, I don't even know why he's doing it. He doesn't plan to live there. He told me he's just going to flip it and use the profit for a down payment on a place downtown." That was the missing puzzle piece I hadn't realized I needed. If Mark was banking on flipping the house for profit, the injunction would hit him twice as hard. Not just emotionally, but financially. Every dollar he poured into renovations would just sit there locked in limbo until the case was resolved. I thanked Emily, kept my tone neutral, but the moment I got back to my car, I called my lawyer. "Good timing," he said when I explained what I'd learned. "We can add that to our filing. Show that Mark's improvements are speculative, and that you stand to lose financially if he's allowed to keep making changes unchecked." Each step felt like tightening a noose, not out of malice but out of precision. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I wasn't on the back foot. I was in control. Even at work, people noticed the change. My boss called me into her office one afternoon and said, "I don't know what's going on in your life, Chris, but you've been on fire lately. Your designs are sharper. You seem confident." I smiled at that because she was right. I felt taller, lighter, even when I was exhausted from long days. There was a part of me that had woken up, a part that refused to be stepped on ever again. A few weeks later, I got the court date, 2 months from now. That night, I celebrated quietly. I ordered takeout, sat in my apartment surrounded by my sketchbooks, and raised a glass of soda like it was champagne. I imagined the look on Mark's face when he got served. The way Dad's smug certainty would crack when he realized this wasn't going away. But I didn't want to just blindside them. No, that would be too easy. I wanted them to feel safe first, to think they'd really won. So, I started being polite when I ran into them, civil. Even if Dad texted, I answered with short, respectful replies. If Mark called to brag about the remodel, I listened, offered a neutral, "Sounds good," and hung up. Let them think I'd accepted my lesson. Let them think I was finally playing the obedient son and brother. Because when the moment came, I wanted the ground to fall out from under them all at once. And then, just when everything was in place, I got an email from the lawyer with the final document attached. "This is it," the subject line read. I opened it and stared at the PDF for a long time, my pulse quickening. This wasn't just paper. This was my voice. My chance to stand up and say, "You don't get to erase me." I hit send on the signed version, leaned back in my chair, and felt something I hadn't felt since the day this all began. Peace. It wasn't over yet. Far from it. But the pieces were all on the board now. And for the first time, I wasn't just playing defense. I was the one setting the trap. The summons went out on a rainy Tuesday morning, and by Wednesday, my phone started buzzing. First it was Mark, then Dad, both leaving increasingly frantic voicemails. "Chris, what is this?" Mark's voice snapped through the speaker. "You're suing us over the house? Are you out of your mind?" I let the call go to voicemail and didn't respond. 2 hours later, Dad called. "You don't know what you're doing, son. These things cost money. Time. You'll regret this." I didn't respond to that either. For weeks, I stayed silent, calm while they stewed. I kept working, kept saving, kept getting stronger. I wasn't going to be baited into an argument that would give them any power over me. When the day of the preliminary hearing finally came, I arrived early. I wore my best button-down shirt, the one that actually fit me well now that I'd been taking care of myself, and I carried my folder neatly under my arm. My lawyer met me at the courthouse steps, nodding in approval. "You ready?" he asked. "More than ready," I said. Mark and Dad arrived late. Of course they did. Dad looked irritated, like this whole thing was beneath him. Mark looked smug, but with an edge of nervousness that hadn't been there before. When we sat down in the courtroom, the judge asked my lawyer to present first. He stood, calm and professional, and laid everything out in clear, sharp language. The original title that still had my name listed, the lack of proper notice, the sale below market value, the automatic withdrawal from my account. He showed the injunction we'd already filed to halt renovations and explained that allowing Mark to continue would cause irreparable financial harm to me as a co-heir. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his seat when he heard the phrase co-heir. Mark turned to look at me, eyes wide for a second before quickly schooling his expression back into something neutral. Their lawyer stood next, arguing that the sale was legal and that I had no right to interfere with Mark's use of the property. But the judge cut him off halfway through. "If what Mr. Graham is presenting is accurate," she said, glancing at the documents, "then this court has serious concerns about how this sale was conducted. The case will proceed to a full hearing." She banged the gavel. Just like that, we were moving forward. Outside the courthouse, Mark stormed up to me, his face red. "You can't do this," he hissed. "Do you have any idea how much money I've put into that place?" I looked him dead in the eye, calm as I'd ever been, and said, "Then I guess you should have thought about that before you kicked me out." Dad stepped forward, trying to intimidate me like he always had when I was younger. "You're tearing this family apart, Chris." I met his gaze evenly. "No," I said quietly. "You did that when you sold Mom's house behind my back." For a moment, Dad's expression faltered, just a flicker, and then he turned away without another word. Over the next few weeks, I started to hear things, whispers through the grapevine. Apparently, Mark had sunk almost all of his savings into the remodel. New floors, new kitchen, custom deck. He'd even taken out a small loan, banking on flipping the house quickly to pay it off. Now, thanks to the injunction, he couldn't rent it, sell it, or even finish some of the renovations without violating the court order. I didn't gloat, not outwardly. I kept my head down, kept working, kept building my case. But inside, I won't lie, it felt good. Not because he was suffering, but because for once, the scales were balanced. For once, I wasn't the one paying the price for someone else's decisions. And then came the day we'd all been waiting for, the full hearing. The courtroom was bigger this time, with more people in attendance. I took a deep breath as I sat down, feeling the weight of the moment. My lawyer went first again, presenting our evidence. He showed the title history, the estate documents from when Mom passed, the lack of proper notice, the undervalued sale price. He even brought in an expert witness who testified that the sale price was far below market and that bypassing my consent had directly harmed my share of the estate. Then it was Dad and Mark's turn. Their lawyer tried to argue that I'd never contributed financially to the house, that I'd been living off their generosity. But my lawyer was ready for that. "We have bank statements showing Mr. Graham paid for repairs, utilities, and maintenance for years," he said, handing over the documents. Not only was he contributing, but his contributions increased the property value that was later transferred without his consent. The judge listened carefully, asking questions now and then. And then, after what felt like hours, she finally spoke. "This court finds sufficient grounds to void the sale of the property," she said. "The house will revert to joint ownership between Mr. Graham and his father until a proper division can be arranged. Furthermore, any funds withdrawn from Mr. Graham's account without authorization are to be reimbursed in full." I sat there stunned for a moment, the words sinking in. We'd done it. Mark's face went pale. Dad's jaw tightened. When we stepped out of the courtroom, Mark rounded on me again. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he shouted. "I just lost months of work, thousands of dollars." I looked at him steadily. "You didn't lose it," I said. "You just invested in something that isn't yours alone." Dad didn't say anything this time. He just stared at me for a long moment, something complicated in his expression. Anger, maybe, but also something else, something that almost looked like respect. I turned to leave, feeling the weight slide off my shoulders with every step. This wasn't the final chapter, not yet, but the power dynamic had shifted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one on my knees asking for scraps. And they knew it. The next move was mine. The weeks that followed the court's decision felt surreal, like watching a chess game where, for once, every move went in my favor. The house, now legally back under joint ownership, was effectively frozen until Dad and I came to a formal agreement on how to divide the property. That meant Mark's grand flip and cash-out plan was dead in the water. He couldn't sell. He couldn't rent. He couldn't even legally finish some of the work he'd started without my signature. I didn't rush to make any decisions. Part of me wanted to walk away entirely, to just let them stew. But I knew if I did, Dad would eventually pressure me to sell my share for pennies just to make this easier. So instead, I played it slow. The first time I went back to the house after the ruling was a moment I'll never forget. The new floors Mark had put in gleamed under the light. The kitchen had been gutted halfway through and construction dust coated the counters. He was there when I arrived, sitting at the island with a beer in his hand, looking exhausted. "You happy now?" he asked bitterly, not even looking at me. I walked through the house slowly, my footsteps echoing. It didn't even feel like home anymore. Not really, but it was still mine. "Not happy," I said finally. "Just done letting you both decide what my life is worth." He slammed the beer down on the counter. "You ruined me, Chris. I maxed out my savings and took out a loan for this place. Now I can't even sell it. I'm stuck." I turned to face him, calm but firm. "You're stuck because you tried to erase me from this house. You made a choice, and you made it worse by gloating while you kicked me out. Actions have consequences, Mark. Welcome to yours." He didn't say anything after that, just stared at the floor. Dad, on the other hand, called me later that night. His voice was tight, controlled. "Your brother is under a lot of stress right now," he said. "You've made your point. Why don't you agree to sell your share so we can put this behind us?" "Because my share is worth more now than it ever was," I said. "And I'm not in a hurry. I want this done right, fairly." For the first time, there was a long pause. Then, Dad said, "You're not the same kid you used to be." "No," I said. "I'm not, and you don't get to treat me like him anymore." That conversation marked a shift I could feel in my bones. The next time we met, it wasn't him towering over me, demanding things. It was two equals sitting at a table. He offered to buy out my share at fair market value, not the insulting family discount he would have tried 6 months ago. I agreed, but only after adding a clause that required him to reimburse me for every dollar taken from my account and for the repairs I'd funded over the years. When the check cleared, I put a down payment on a condo of my own. Small, yes, but bright and new and fully mine. The first night I slept there, I stood in the empty living room with my laptop open, playing Mom's favorite song just to let it fill the space. It felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Meanwhile, word spread through the family about what had happened. My aunt called to say she was proud of me for standing up for myself. Even Grandma, who had always favored Mark, called to say she thought Dad had been too harsh and that she was glad I'd fought back. As for Mark, he had to finish paying off the loan he'd taken for renovations and eventually scraped together enough to buy out Dad's remaining share. By the time it was finally his, the market had dipped, and he ended up losing money on the sale a year later. I didn't gloat, but I won't pretend I didn't feel a small, quiet satisfaction knowing that life had handed him the lesson he'd tried to hand me. The last time I saw them both together was at a family gathering months later. The tension in the air was thick, but I didn't shrink the way I used to. I walked in, shoulders squared, head high, wearing a new suit I'd bought with the bonus I'd earned from a major design project at work. Mark didn't say much, just nodded stiffly. Dad gave me a long look across the table, then said, "I hear you're doing well for yourself." "I am," I said simply. "Better than ever." And that was the truth. As dinner wound down, I stood, ready to leave. I looked at both of them, the father who had dismissed me as a failure, the brother who had treated me like a problem to be solved, and I felt no anger anymore, just clarity. "I want you both to know something," I said, my voice steady. "What you did hurt me more than I can explain, but it also forced me to grow in ways I never would have otherwise. You thought you were teaching me a lesson about responsibility. Turns out I learned one about self-respect." I turned and walked out, the room silent behind me. As I stepped into the cool night air, I couldn't help but smile. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to prove anything to them. I didn't need to. because they finally understood I wasn't the one who'd been cut out of the family. They were the ones who'd lost me, and I was never going back. Now on to the next story. Story 5. At a family picnic, my sister clinked her glass and said, "To the one who always shows up, broke, desperate, and still trying to matter." My parents laughed. I lifted my drink and said, "To the desperate one who just closed the account funding your rent." The silence after that toast was beautiful. And then I was already regretting going to the picnic when I saw my sister unloading a designer cooler from the back of her boyfriend's car. The thing probably cost more than the entire monthly grocery bill for a normal family. But there she was, smiling like a lifestyle influencer, setting it next to a hand-woven picnic basket and a monogram blanket. My mom waved me over without enthusiasm. My dad gave me that same distracted nod he always used when pretending I hadn't just walked in. I placed my plastic grocery bag on the corner of the table. Inside was a bag of off-brand chips and 2 cans of soda. I didn't even try to pretend I cared. The rest of the family was already there. My cousin Rebecca, who never pays for anything but somehow always has her nails done, and my Aunt Joanne, who thinks my name is short for mistake. The whole thing reeked of that performative warmth that families like ours do when they want to look united in public but secretly can't stand each other. I was the only one who didn't bother hiding it. I sat through 2 hours of passive-aggressive jokes. They teased me for being single, for not dressing up, for not smiling more. My mom made some comment about how some of us know how to grow up, and my dad chuckled like he understood the punchline. I let it all slide. That was always the game. They mock, I ignore, and the world keeps turning. But then my sister decided she needed a moment. She raised her overpriced glass of wine and called for everyone's attention. Everyone got quiet because they knew she loved to toast like we were at a wedding. Here's to the one who always shows up, broke, discouraged, but still trying to be important. They all laughed. Even my mom. Even my dad. I didn't. I picked up my cheap plastic cup with flat soda, held it up just like she did, and said, "To the desperate man who just closed the account he was paying your rent from." No one laughed. In fact, for the first time in years, I had their full attention. You could hear a kid crying in the distance. A bird somewhere flapped away. I watched my sister's smile fall like a dropped plate. My mom's eyes darted toward my dad, who was staring at his cup like maybe he could hide inside it. I didn't explain. I didn't flinch. I just finished my drink, wiped my hands, and stood up. "I'll be heading out." No one said a word. They didn't ask where I was going or if I was okay. That was the magic of that family. I had just flipped their entire world on its head, and they were still trying to pretend it wasn't happening. 8 days later, my phone buzzed. "Hey, rent's due. Can you send the usual $1,200? I didn't even respond at first. I let it sit there while I went out for a walk, bought myself lunch, read a book, took a nap. Then hours later, I finally replied, "No." She tried to call. I let it ring out. Then the text came, "What do you mean no? Are you serious? You can't just stop. It's hard right now. Ethan's been looking for work. I'm already behind." I told her to move in with our parents. They had space. She called that ridiculous and said I was being vindictive. I told her it was time for her and Ethan to grow up and live within their means. That didn't sit well, so she called our parents. The next day, I got a long voicemail from my mom. She tried to sound calm, but I could tell she was furious. She said we were family, that we help each other, that I was blowing things out of proportion. I texted her back, "If you're that worried, you can help her. But don't ask me to keep paying for people who treat me like trash." An hour later, my dad called. "So you're cutting her off? For real?" I told him, "Yes. And by the way, he might want to get the mortgage in order too, because I wouldn't be paying their $3,400 next month either." Silence, then laughter. The kind of laughter that says, "You don't really believe what you're hearing. You wouldn't dare." But I did. I dared. And for the first time in my life, I enjoyed watching the world tilt back in my direction. They thought I was bluffing. That's the part that made it funnier, like I hadn't just been paying their bills for nearly a year while they acted like it was owed to them. My mom called me again 2 days later, this time pretending she wanted to check in on me. I ignored it. Then she sent a photo of our dog from 10 years ago, probably hoping to soften me up. I didn't reply. The next rent day came and went. My sister sent a string of texts, each one more dramatic than the last. Mason, I'm getting eviction warnings. You can't just cut me off. This isn't just hurting me, it's hurting Ethan, too. You said you'd help until we got stable. I finally answered, you've had 7 months. That's enough time to get stable. Or at least move somewhere you can actually afford. She tried to guilt me, said I was heartless, said she was crying. Then she said something that made me pause. I might have to break my lease. We'll have to move back in with Mom and Dad. I replied instantly, perfect. That's exactly what I suggested. Sounds responsible. She didn't answer after that. But I knew what she was really afraid of. It wasn't the moving. It was the shame. My sister had spent years building this image of herself as successful and put together. Living with our parents again would tear that down. And even worse, it would mean I was right. Later that night, I got a call from my dad. We just spoke to your sister. She told us about the rent. What's going on with you? I told him what was going on. I was done. He said something about disrupting the balance in the family. I asked him what balance he was talking about. The part where I work 70-hour weeks and they make fun of me between bank transfers? Then he said the mortgage was due in a few days, and if I was really going to leave them in the lurch, he expected at least some warning. I reminded him that I gave my warning at the picnic. He didn't think I was serious. Well, I am. He hung up on me. That weekend, I got a text from my mom. You don't understand how hard things are. We've been counting on you. We thought we were a team. I wrote back, you didn't treat me like part of a team. You treated me like an ATM with anxiety. No response. The next few days were quiet. Then my sister posted a photo online of her and Ethan packing boxes. The caption said, new beginnings, but I could tell it was eating her alive. She'd gone from a modern apartment downtown to moving back into her teenage bedroom, and things only got worse from there. By the end of the second week, my mom called again. This time, she didn't bother pretending to be calm. So, you're seriously cutting us off too? I said, yes. You wouldn't dare. I already did. 3 months, that's how long I'd been paying their mortgage. $3,400 a month. I was covering it so they wouldn't have to downsize or move to a cheaper neighborhood. I was doing it quietly without a thank you because they told me it was just until your father gets his pension sorted. That was 4 months ago. So I stopped. No more transfers. No more middle-of-the-night bank alerts. Nothing. A week after that, I heard from a cousin that the house was officially in pre-foreclosure. Apparently, my parents never told anyone I was paying it. They let the family believe they were just managing things fine. Now everyone knew. The irony was incredible. When I was helping them, it was invisible. But when I stopped, suddenly I was the villain. They all started turning on each other. My sister blamed my parents for relying on me. My parents blamed her for dragging me into her drama. My mom told my dad it was his fault for thinking I'd always be the fixer. And somewhere in all of it, I realized something. Without me, they couldn't function. And when I was helping, they acted like it was the natural order of things. But now, they were finally forced to look at what they were without the money I earned. And it wasn't pretty. By the time the 4th week hit, my sister was back at our parents' house. And you'd think that would humble her. Didn't. She acted like she was doing them a favor by showing up. From what I heard, she and my mom were at each other's throats by day, too, and my dad was quietly researching noise-canceling headphones. Ethan didn't last long. He packed up and left after a few days, muttering something about space and not being able to think in this house. He'd gone from playing Xbox in a city apartment to sharing a bathroom with my mom's 3,000 decorative towels. I didn't blame him, but the best part? No one blamed me yet. They still thought I might cave. The text started again. I just need a little help getting back on my feet. You know, I'm looking for jobs. Ethan's staying with friends, but he's trying too. Please, Mason. I can't stay here forever. No. I didn't even say it with emotion. Just the word. No. She tried guilt. Said she'd have a breakdown. That I was punishing her for being younger. that I never cared about family anyway. Then my mom stepped in. She invited me over for dinner, said it wasn't about money, just wanted to catch up. I already knew it was bait, but I accepted. I wanted to see how bad it had gotten. When I walked in, I could feel it instantly. The house was quieter, colder. It wasn't a warm family dinner setup. It felt like a truce meeting between countries that had already gone to war. My sister didn't even come downstairs. The dining table had bills spread across one end and 2 reheated lasagna trays sitting at the other. My mom smiled too tightly. My dad looked like he hadn't slept properly in days. We made small talk. They asked how work was going. I gave short answers. Then my mom leaned in a bit and said, "We're in a tough spot right now. Just for a little while if you could help again." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get emotional. I just laid it out. "You mocked me when I struggled. You made jokes about me always trying to be important. I was paying for your house, her apartment, your lives. And you acted like I owed it, like it was the natural order of things. You never asked how I was doing, never said thanks. You just assumed I'd keep going." My dad tried to say something about how family helps each other. I shut him down. "Exactly. Family helps each other. I helped you and you spat in my face every time you could." My mom sat in silence. My dad looked away. That moment should have been awkward, but I felt calm. Then I said this, "I'm hosting a picnic. Just us. 1 month from now, I'll tell you what I've decided. Whether I'll help again, whether this continues or ends for good." My mom nodded like she understood. My dad didn't say anything, and I left before dessert. On the way home, I stopped for a burger, sat in my car, and just breathed. It was the first time in a long time I didn't feel like someone's crutch. The first time I didn't feel guilty for saying no. And the best part, they were finally starting to realize that I wasn't bluffing. The month crawled by slower than I expected. At first, I figured the silence meant they were planning something. Maybe another manipulation. Maybe just waiting me out. But nothing came. No texts. No missed calls. Not even one of my mom's classic pity comments on old Facebook photos. Like, "You used to smile more back then." I almost started thinking they were genuinely trying to move on. Then I got a call from Jeremy, my cousin, who somehow always knew when drama was brewing. "Hey man, just checking in. You coming to that little family thing you planned?" I didn't tell him it wasn't a family thing. I told him yes. Then the next day, I got a message from an old neighbor. "Hey, your mom dropped by. Said you were hosting something. She asked if you still had that promotion at work." She seemed curious. There it was, the build-up. They were spreading it around like I was hosting some kind of redemption tour, and I already knew what they were hoping for. I'd walk in with a speech, apologize for being harsh, then offer to cover everyone's mistakes again, maybe even hand out envelopes. That's how they saw it. So, I decided to do the one thing they never expected. Turn the picnic into a job fair. I spent the next week calling in favors. I reached out to my sister's old manager, who still remembered her flaking on shifts. He didn't want to hire her again, but he knew a clinic across town desperate for a part-time assistant. I called one of my dad's former coworkers who ran inventory for a construction supplier. Turns out they needed someone reliable for managing equipment. I even got in touch with a friend who worked at a community kitchen where my mom used to volunteer before she started saying she was too busy to be seen there anymore. By the time picnic day arrived, I had a folder of opportunities tailored to each of them. They showed up overdressed, like they were headed to a televised family reunion. My sister wore a floral dress that probably came from the last of her savings. My mom brought a quiche. My dad wore sunglasses even though it was mostly cloudy. They were smiling wide, rehearsed smiles. The kind that meant one thing, he's going to fold. We sat at a lonely table in a public park. Just 5 of us. There was no music, no tablecloths, just plain sandwiches and water bottles. I brought myself. I didn't even bother with chairs for everyone. I brought one for me. Let them figure it out. After some surface-level small talk, they stared at me like I owed them a performance. And I gave them one, just not the one they wanted. I took out a folder and handed them each a paper. My sister looked at hers and laughed, thinking I was joking. "What is this? A job interview? They're expecting your call." She blinked. My mom asked if this was a joke. My dad just stared. I handed my mom an application for a nonprofit kitchen that needed help with food prep and events. She used to do that kind of thing years ago before she decided it was beneath her. I gave my dad a printed offer from a guy who needed a reliable inventory manager. Flexible hours, decent pay, nothing glamorous but steady. And then I gave my sister 3 listings. Part-time at a local clinic, a call center opening, and a position as a receptionist at a dental office downtown. They didn't say anything at first. Then came the explosion. My sister stood up and shouted that this was cruel, that I was setting her up to fail by pushing her into jobs she didn't want. My mom called me condescending, said I was treating them like they were my employees. My dad accused me of trying to humiliate them. I let them finish. Then I said it. You asked for help. This is help. That didn't go over well. They packed up. The quiche went back in the cooler. The smiles turned into glares and they left. All of them. And there I was, sitting alone at a picnic table with untouched sandwiches and a folder of printed job offers. But I didn't feel alone. I felt awake. For the first time in years, I had drawn a line they couldn't erase. I wasn't cutting them off because I was angry. I was cutting them off because I was finally done apologizing for not being broken enough to be loved by them. Then, 3 days later, something happened I never saw coming. The clinic called me. They wanted to thank me for referring my friend to their open position. Apparently, my sister had shown up for the interview. Not only that, she took the job. When the clinic called, I almost didn't recognize the number. I answered out of habit, expecting spam or a wrong number. Instead, it was the woman I'd spoken to a week earlier about the assistant position. Just wanted to thank you for referring Madison. She interviewed Monday, started today. So far so good. I sat there in silence for a second. Madison took the job. I didn't expect that. I thought she tossed the papers in the trash the second she got home. Maybe yelled about me in group chats for a week. But she actually followed through. That meant one of 2 things. Either she'd hit true rock bottom or something had shifted. Either way, I was intrigued. I didn't reach out to her. I didn't congratulate her. I just waited. For days later, I got a text. Started work. It's fine. Don't get used to me thanking you. But also, I'm not quitting. So there. That was it. No hearts, no smiley faces, just facts. And that tiny spark of stubborn pride she'd always had was now doing something useful for once. I almost replied, but I didn't. A few days later, it was my dad who blinked. He called and asked if the warehouse job was still available. Said he'd given it some thought. I didn't rub it in. I just gave him the contact again and told him the guy was still looking. The following week, I heard through my cousin, the same one who'd called fishing for gossip, that my mom had taken the prep kitchen job. Quietly, without telling anyone. She was clocking hours under a different last name, probably too embarrassed to be seen working somewhere she used to look down on. And me? I didn't do anything. I watched. I worked. I lived. They were struggling, sure, but they were finally owning their struggle. And the best part, they stopped asking for money because deep down they knew I meant it when I said I was done. A full month passed. That's when I decided to send one final message in the family group chat. I hadn't used it in almost a year. It still had that awful group name my mom picked, Fam Bam. I typed, since it's been a while, I'm hosting a follow-up picnic. Same spot this Saturday. Come if you want. No one replied, but they showed up. My sister came in scrubs, straight from work. My dad looked like he'd been moving boxes all morning. My mom wore a plain windbreaker and zero jewelry. No makeup, no quiche, no fanfare. We sat. I didn't make them wait this time. I told them I wasn't going back to paying their bills. That just because I earned more didn't mean I owed more. That love isn't measured by how many direct deposits you make for someone who refuses to stand on their own feet. They sat in silence, not angry this time, just tired, maybe even thoughtful. And when they left, no one yelled. No one blamed me. No one tried to negotiate, because this time they knew I meant every word. The days after the second picnic were quiet. Not the hostile kind, but the kind that happens when people realize there's nothing left to argue about. No more lectures, no more begging, no more pretending like we were in some kind of financial custody battle. That second picnic broke whatever weird illusion we'd all been clinging to. It didn't end with a dramatic storm-off this time. They just walked away like people who finally understood the weight of their own lives. For weeks, nothing happened. I went to work, came home, cooked for myself, watched a couple documentaries I had been putting off. I didn't feel angry or bitter. I just felt steady. Then little signs started popping up. My sister posted a picture of her ID badge on Instagram. No caption, just a badge, her hand, and a public bathroom mirror. She used to post beach photos with cocktails and inspirational captions like, "Good vibes only." This one was silent, real. A few days later, my dad texted, "Got forklift certified today. My back's not thrilled, but it's good work." No sarcasm, no passive aggression, just that. I stared at the message for a while. He hadn't spoken to me like that since I was 19. The biggest surprise came from my mom. I was cleaning out my inbox late one night when I noticed an email from her. Subject line, "No title." The body was 2 sentences. "I didn't realize how much we relied on you until we had to rely on ourselves. We're trying. Even if it's late, no dramatic apology, no emotional manipulation, just a straight acknowledgement." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. For the first time, it felt like she said something because she wanted to, not because she was trying to twist me back into orbit. And here's the part no one talks about. When you stop carrying people who thought it was your job, they don't just fall. They scatter, they scramble, they adapt. My sister's been working at the clinic for over a month now. Her posts are quieter, less curated. She's even started taking online classes on weekends. I heard it from a friend, not from her. She didn't send me a proud look at me text. She just did it. My dad took the inventory job. He hasn't missed a day. He still doesn't talk much, but now when he does, it sounds different, like he knows who he is again. My mom. She's been prepping food at the nonprofit kitchen for weeks. She runs donation drives on Sundays. She used to scoff at the people who needed that kind of help. Now she's shoulder to shoulder with them. And me? I'm making more money than I ever have. But the important part, I'm keeping it. Not hoarding it, just not bleeding it out for people who treated me like a safety net they could also laugh at. I started planning a solo trip, something I never felt like I could do before. I booked it last week. One-way flight. No return date yet. Sometimes I think about how weird it is that it took everything breaking for anything real to start. There was a time I believed that giving endlessly would eventually make them love me better. That if I just showed up, paid up, shut up, they'd eventually treat me like someone worth respecting. They didn't. But once the help dried up and the expectation shattered, something strange happened. They stopped being cruel. They stopped mocking me. They stopped pretending they were better because now they had to fight for what they wanted. And the most satisfying part, they're actually doing it. They're far from perfect. I'm not delusional, but they're moving, earning, surviving. And me? I'm finally free. Not just from the financial grip they had on me, but from that old belief that I had to keep sacrificing to be seen. I don't need them to see me anymore, because now they're too busy trying to see themselves. And that, in the end, is what they always needed. Not my money, not my pity, just a mirror. And the silence that comes after a fall? That's where the truth finally speaks. I wasn't planning to give another update. Honestly, I thought the story ended with them walking away and me finally living my own life. But something happened last week that felt too full circle not to mention. I was at this small coffee shop downtown reading on a Saturday morning when I heard someone call my name. I looked up and saw my sister in scrubs with a to-go cup in one hand and a bag of groceries in the other. She looked tired, but not fake tired like before. Real, functional tired. She smiled awkwardly. I nodded. She sat down without asking. We didn't talk about the past. No apology, no rehashing of what was said. We just talked about work, the weather, how weird it is getting older. She mentioned Ethan once, casually, like someone mentioning an old coworker. I didn't ask questions. Before she left, she paused and said quietly, "You were right. We needed it. All of it." Then she walked out, and that was it. A few days later, I heard from my dad. He sent me a photo of a grill he bought with his own damn paycheck. That's what he wrote. My mom started organizing a local food drive. She emailed me a flyer not asking for money, just asking if I'd share it. For once, they don't need me. Not the way they used to. And for once, I'm okay with being just their brother, just their son. Not their bank, not their backup plan, just Mason. Now on to the next story. Story 6. Parents said they skipped my birthday because everyone's been so busy. 2 days later, my aunt posted, "Grateful for family and surprise cake nights." It was for my sister. I waited. Then my mom messaged, "You're still covering the electricity, right?" I replied, "Definitely." Then I shut off every account I managed. Left a note in the smart thermostat, "Find warmth in each other." At 8:03 a.m., I got 41 missed calls. One said, "Emergency." What really got to me wasn't that they missed my birthday. It was that they didn't even try to lie about it. No fake excuse, no white lie, not even a rush text pretending they remembered late. Just complete silence. The kind that hits you harder because it isn't a mistake. It's intentional. I turned 29 on a Thursday this year. Not a milestone birthday or anything, but still. It's not like they didn't know. My mom used to make a big deal about how I was born right before midnight. How I almost ended up a Friday baby. Every year she brought it up like it was some fun family trivia. This year, nothing. Not even a text. I didn't plan anything big. Just figured we'd do what we usually did. Order food. Maybe bake something at home. Just us. No friends. We never had a tradition, but there was always something. I thought maybe they were planning a surprise. I actually gave them the benefit of the doubt. I kept looking at the time, thinking they were going to show up at any minute. By 10 p.m., I was sitting in my apartment alone with the leftover pizza I ordered for myself. No missed calls, no messages. I texted my sister just to see what was going on. "Hey, what's up?" Not even a read receipt. I went to bed thinking something must have happened. Something big enough that they'd all gone quiet. I even started to worry. But then Saturday morning I saw it. My aunt posted a picture. Ashley was smiling, holding a giant cake with pink candles. The whole family was there. My parents, our cousins, the neighbors, even grandma. All of them smiling like they'd never missed a thing. The caption said, "Thank you for the lovely evening with the family, the cake, and the surprise for Ashley's birthday. So much love." Ashley's birthday is 3 days after mine. That meant that when they ignored me on Thursday, they were already planning that party, already texting each other, picking out decorations, laughing, coordinating the surprise. They didn't forget. They skipped me on purpose. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there for a long time staring at the photo, zooming in on their faces. At one point, I actually laughed, but it wasn't because anything was funny. That night, my mom finally texted me, "You're still paying the electric bill, right?" No mention of my birthday. No apology, just straight to business. Like I was a utility company. I stared at that message for a while before I typed back, "Of course." Then I got to work. I opened every account, electric, internet, Netflix, the streaming subscriptions, even the Amazon Prime they used to order everything, all in my name. All set up last year when Dad lost his job and they said they were rebuilding. I shut down everything. I drove to their house after midnight. I didn't knock. I still had the spare key. I left one thing behind. A sticky note on the thermostat. It just said, "Find warmth in each other." That was all. By 8:03 the next morning, I had 41 missed calls. Some from my mom, some from Ashley, one from Dad, and one from a number saved in my phone as urgent. I didn't answer any of them. Not yet. Let them feel it for a change. They didn't even pretend to be sorry. That was the part one kept turning over in my head the morning after I shut everything down. No one even tried to lie to claim they'd sent a message and it didn't go through. They just acted like it wasn't a big deal. I guess to them it wasn't. After I left the note on the thermostat and walked out, I turned my phone off for 24 hours. Not to make a point, but because I didn't trust myself not to answer if they started calling. I knew I'd say too much too fast. I wanted them to sit in the dark for a while, both literally and metaphorically. When I turned it back on the next morning, There were 41 missed calls. A bunch of voicemails. The first few were calm, confused voices, mostly from my mom and Ashley. Hey, something's wrong with the Wi-Fi. Netflix isn't working. The thermostat won't turn on. By the fifth voicemail, my dad's voice started showing up. Less confused, more irritated. Did you forget to pay the bills? What's going on here? There was one from Ashley, annoyed and sarcastic. If this is about your birthday, that's really childish. Nate, that one I saved. By the end of the day, my mom finally sent a message that acknowledged the shutdown. Why did you cut everything off without warning? I didn't answer. Instead, I logged into the insurance dashboard and removed their car from my multi-vehicle policy. I'd added it last summer when Dad said the payments were killing them. Just for a while, he'd said. It had been 14 months. I also canceled the streaming platforms we shared. Hulu, HBO, even the DoorDash subscription Ashley used at college. I didn't leave a note this time. I wanted the absence to speak for itself. 2 days later, my mom called while I was at work. I picked up out of pure curiosity. She didn't even ask how I was. You had no right to turn off the electricity, she said. That house is still partly yours. You lived here. You missed my birthday. I said, all of you. You didn't forget. You just chose not to show up. We were all very busy. Then why did you have a party 2 days later? Another pause. Ashley's birthday is different. It was already planned. You had 2 days. You should have said something if it mattered that much. That's what did it for me. That one sentence, like it was on me to beg them to care. We've been good to you, she added. Family doesn't act this way. You texted me about the electric bill before you even realized what you missed. And you're making us suffer for one mistake. That was the problem. They thought it was one mistake. I hung up. That night, I checked my credit card account. There were 4 active subcards. Ashley had 1. So did my mom. I canceled all of them. They'd used those cards like they were entitled to them. Gas, food, Amazon, everything linked to my name. 2 days later, my dad called. It was brief. This ends now, he said. You've made your point. It's not a point, I said. It's a shift. What the hell does that mean? It means I'm not your backup plan anymore. He didn't like that. You wouldn't have any of that money without us. You owe this family. You threw a birthday party for Ashley and didn't even send me a text. Are you really going to hold that over us? You're punishing your own parents over something petty. Petty? I repeated. Right? You think you're above this family now? Fine. Then don't come around when things get hard. I wasn't planning to. He hung up. That week, they went full Cold War. No texts, no calls, just quiet. The kind of silence that tries to manipulate you into apologizing first. But I didn't budge. They didn't know it yet, but I still had more strings to cut. I had no intention of dragging this out, but I also wasn't about to let them think they still had me on a leash. Let them see what life looks like when I'm not quietly fixing everything behind the scenes. Let them feel the real weight of forgetting. By the end of the second week, they stopped calling. That should have felt like peace. Instead, it felt like some weird kind of standoff, one where I wasn't sure if I'd won anything or just permanently lit a match under the last bridge. The silence didn't mean they'd given up. It meant they were regrouping. I started hearing little things from the outside. A friend of my cousin texted me randomly to ask if everything was okay between me and my parents. She said my mom had been venting at church about how I turned my back on the family. I didn't correct her. If that's how they wanted to frame it, fine. But I knew they'd be back. It took exactly 23 days. That morning, I got a text from my mom. Just one sentence. Can we have a proper talk as a family? I didn't answer. An hour later, Ashley messaged me. 2. Can you come over for dinner tonight? We want to talk. I didn't know what to make of it. For a second, I considered going just to see what they try. Curiosity was stronger than any hope of reconciliation. I said I'd come. The house felt colder than I remembered, literally and otherwise. They must have had the heat turned way down to save money. Grandma was sitting in her usual spot on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. She smiled when she saw me and said, "About time." In the dining room, Everyone was already seated, like they were waiting for a verdict. "We've been thinking," my dad said. "Maybe things got out of hand. We could have handled things better." He didn't say sorry. He said, "Things." Ashley jumped in. "We were wrong to forget your birthday." That was more direct. I appreciated it, even if it felt coached. My mom added, "We'd like to start over, have dinner together like we used to, maybe reconnect." It was the most united front they'd put up in years. I nodded slowly. I wasn't sure if it was genuine or just strategy, but I wanted to believe it, so I said, "Okay, we can try." For the next hour, we actually talked about small things. Work, grandma's health, a new dog someone in the neighborhood got. Felt normal. Strange, but kind of nice. At the end of the night, just as I was putting on my jacket, my dad said, "So, now that we've cleared the air, maybe you could help out again, just with the insurance and utilities for now until we get back on track." Of course. There it was. I said, "No." He blinked like he hadn't heard me right. I said, "No, I'm not doing that again." The mood in the room flipped like a switch. My mom looked at him and he stood up. "If you're not going to help your own family, then maybe you don't belong here." Grandma looked up sharply and said, "That's enough." But it wasn't. He pointed at the door. "You can leave." I didn't argue. I walked out. It was the first time I felt truly done. A few days later, I got a message from Grandma. She wanted to meet not at their house, at mine. She said they needed to come to me this time. That was the beginning of something different. I had no idea what was coming next. They showed up without warning. Well, not entirely without warning. Grandma called that morning. She asked if I'd be home. Said it might be a good idea to stay in. She didn't say why. I asked if it was about them. She didn't answer, just said, "You'll know when it happens." Then she hung up. 3 hours later, I saw their car pull into my driveway. My mom, Dad, and Ashley stepped out like they were going door to door selling apologies. They stood there for a minute before anyone rang the bell. I watched from the kitchen. I could have ignored them. I thought about it, but something made me go to the door and open it. None of them said anything at first. My mom gave a small wave. My dad was staring at the ground like it owed him something. Ashley looked nervous for once in her life. "Can we come in?" my mom asked. I stepped aside. We sat in the living room, each on separate pieces of furniture like strangers at a doctor's office. The silence dragged until my dad finally spoke. "This isn't about money." That was how he started. I don't know if he meant for it to sound defensive, but it did. He continued, "We talked. All of us. We weren't fair to you." I waited. My mom leaned forward. "You did a lot for us." Quietly. "We just got used to it. We took you for granted." Ashley spoke up too, which was unexpected. "And we were wrong to make you feel like you didn't matter. That was cruel." I didn't see it at the time, but it was. It wasn't the same rehearsed tone I'd heard before. It sounded like they'd actually talked, maybe even argued about it. Maybe Grandma got through to them. My mom looked around the room. "We're not here to ask you to fix anything. We just want to know if it's too late to start over. Not with help, just with you." I didn't answer right away. I looked at them, all sitting there like visitors in a stranger's house. It was the first time they'd entered my space, not expecting anything. "I'm not helping with the bills again," I said. "Not 1 cent. That part's over." My dad nodded slowly. "Understood. Everything from now on has to be real. No asking for favors disguised as conversations. No guilt. No silence when it matters." They all agreed. I wasn't sure I believed it would last, but I let them stay. We talked for a while about little things. Grandma's cooking, some old neighbor that moved out, my job. Nobody asked me for anything, and it felt almost normal. They left after a couple hours. My mom hugged me carefully, like she wasn't sure she was allowed. My dad just said, "Thanks for letting us come." Ashley said nothing, just smiled like someone who wasn't sure what came next. After they left, I sat on the couch staring at the empty space they just filled. I wanted to believe they changed, but I'd also lived long enough to know people don't flip switches. They adjust when they're cold, and they go back to old habits the moment the heat's back on. 2 days later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a small white card. Handwritten, careful block letters. You've reminded them what it feels like to lose something. Don't forget what it felt like to be forgotten. No signature, no name, just that. It shook me more than any of their apologies because it was the truth. I had spent years making sure they never felt the absence of anything. But when it was my turn to be seen, they looked away. Now I had a decision to make. Not about them, about me. Whether this was healing or just the eye of the storm, the letter sat on my counter longer than it should have. I moved it once to wipe underneath, then put it right back like it belonged there. It wasn't threatening, but it wasn't comforting either. Just a quiet sentence I couldn't stop thinking about. You've reminded them what it feels like to lose something. Don't forget what it felt like to be forgotten. Part of me thought one of them had written it. Ashley, maybe, or even Grandma. But the handwriting didn't match. It was too neat. Block letters, like someone who didn't want their style recognized, which made it worse. Someone knew. Someone was watching close enough to send a reminder. And they were right. At first, things stayed quiet, uneventful. Even the group chat that had been dead for weeks suddenly had small pings. My mom sent a photo of Grandma holding a pie she baked. My dad said, "Happy Monday." One morning out of nowhere, which I ignored, Ashley DM'd me a meme about siblings that she would have never sent a month ago. I didn't know if it was an olive branch or bait. For a while, it felt almost like a life I could have believed in if I hadn't lived the last 3 decades. And then, predictably, the tone shifted. It was Friday night when I got the message from my mom. "Just wondering, when you said you weren't helping with bills anymore, did you mean everything? Because Dad's car needs work and we're stretched this month." I didn't respond. Saturday morning, Ashley called. She jumped straight into it like we were already mid-conversation. "So, about the car thing. I think Mom texted you." "Yeah." She waited. And I said, "I'm not helping anymore." There was a silence on the line, like she was genuinely surprised. "But things are better now." That was the whole point of coming over. No, the point was honesty. I'm being honest. I'm not paying for things anymore. Well, this isn't like a luxury, Nate. It's the car. Dad needs it for work. I could hear the irritation rising, but I didn't feed it. "I'm not doing it. You're unbelievable sometimes. You know that." And she hung up. By the time I checked my phone that evening, I had 3 messages from my dad. All of them short. "So, this is how it's going to be. You've made your choice. If we're not family anymore, just say it." No calls, just statements. Like he was declaring war but didn't want to hear the other side. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I knew exactly what would happen next. And I was right. Sunday, I drove over to Grandma's. She'd asked me to pick up some groceries for her. Eggs, bread, a specific brand of orange marmalade she swore by. I didn't ask how she was getting by without the family credit card I'd canceled. I had a feeling she'd never used it anyway. When I walked in, she was in her robe, slippers, reading a paperback mystery novel with half the pages falling out. She smiled when she saw me, but her face dropped just slightly as she said, "They're slipping again." "I know." She handed me a cup of tea like we always did when I visited. The silence was comfortable, familiar. After a few minutes, she said, "They think if they push just a little, you'll cave. They always thought that. This time's different. They're starting to realize they don't know you without the wallet attached." I stayed longer than I planned. We talked about nothing. TV. An old neighbor who got arrested. A bad cake she baked last week. Felt like safety. When I got home that evening, I found it. A new group chat had been created. "Family meeting tomorrow. Our house. 7 p.m. No context, no greeting, just an invitation that sounded more like a summons. It had been made by Ashley. My mom and dad were already in it. Grandma wasn't. That told me everything. They wanted a meeting, but not with everyone. Just the 3 of them and me. I didn't reply. I just stared at the name of the group. They were going to try to reset the board again, but this time they were going to push harder. Maybe guilt, maybe anger, maybe promises they didn't plan to keep. Whatever it was, I wasn't walking in unprepared. Because now I had nothing left to lose except the piece of peace I'd started to build without them. I never replied to the group chat. But at exactly 6:56 p.m., I turned off my car engine in their driveway. The house looked the same. Same chipped paint on the garage. Same porch light flickering like a dying firefly. But everything else felt different, colder, like I was pulling up to a building where someone I used to know lived. Ashley opened the door before I knocked. No greeting, no smile, just a silent nod. Then she stepped aside. They were all in the dining room already. For chairs set up around the table, perfectly spaced. The fourth one, the one left for me, was pulled out slightly, like they were trying to look welcoming without actually being welcoming. I sat down. No one said anything for a full minute. Then my dad cleared his throat like we were about to start a corporate strategy meeting. "We wanted to have this conversation face to face," he said. My mom nodded. "Things haven't been right. We know that." Ashley leaned forward. "We know what we did, and we know what we didn't do. They were trying. I could tell. Not just to fix it, trying not to blow it. Carefully choosing every word like I was a landmine. They weren't sure how to step around. We took advantage of you," my mom said. "And we let it go too far. You were there for us and we gave nothing back. We know an apology doesn't erase what happened," Ashley added. "But we're not here to ask you for anything." I just sat back in the chair and listened. I didn't nod. I didn't interrupt. I wanted to hear the full version of their truth before I said anything. "We miss you," my mom said. "Not what you did for us. You. That's what we're asking for. A second chance to know our son again." That part almost hit something in me. Almost. When they were done talking, I sat up and said, "I forgive you." I meant it. At least the part of me that needed to let go did. They exhaled like I'd lifted some invisible burden off their backs. There was this brief, strange moment where everything felt suspended, like we were on the edge of something new. For a little while after, we just talked. Casual stuff. Safe topics. A movie Ashley watched. Grandma's blood pressure. My mom made a joke about burning chicken last week. It was almost eerie how normal it felt. Then as I was standing up to leave, my dad said it. "So, down the line, once things settle again, you'd maybe be open to helping a little. Not like before. Just a bit. We could really use it." The words hung in the air like smoke. I turned to him slowly. "No." He blinked. "No, not right now. I meant in the future. Once." "No," I said again. "Not later. Not ever." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. My mom looked like she wanted to say something, but didn't. Ashley looked like she couldn't believe I had actually said it. My dad stood up. "Then what the hell was all this? This was me giving you a chance to be honest, and you were. But the moment things felt stable, you started looking for an opening." He pointed toward the door. "You can go." Before I could move, I heard Grandma's voice from behind me. I didn't know she was even in the house. "No, he won't," she said. "He's not leaving like that." She came into the room holding a glass of water, standing straight despite her knees. "You don't get to push him out again just because he didn't give you the answer you wanted." My dad didn't say a word, just walked into the kitchen. My mom stared at the floor. Ashley sat frozen like she wanted to disappear. I walked out on my own. 3 days later, they showed up at my place. All three of them, standing in the same order on my porch, but this time Grandma was with them. They didn't text. They didn't call. They just came. I didn't open the door at first. I watched from behind the blinds. They didn't knock. They just waited. After a few minutes, I opened the door. "We're not here to ask," my mom said. "We're here because we're ready to listen. We want to know you again," Ashley added. "For real this time." My dad didn't say anything, but he looked different, smaller, almost tired. I let them in. We sat around my kitchen table. My table in my home. And they didn't ask me for money. They didn't talk about the car or the internet or the bills. They asked about me. They asked about how I felt that day when no one showed up. What it was like to feel invisible. And this time they actually listened. It wasn't a full repair. That doesn't happen in a single evening. But it was something real. Before they left, My mom turned to me and said, "We'll probably screw up again, but we're going to keep showing up even if you don't answer." I nodded. The next morning, a second letter arrived in the mail. Same handwriting, same no return address. This is the part where they either become better or just better at pretending. You'll know soon enough. I folded the paper and tucked it in the back of my kitchen drawer. I wasn't sure which version of them I'd just seen, but I was ready. Either way. Now on to the next story. Story 7. My parents didn't help me with my studies, so they bought a new car for $44,000 for my sister. Then, when I became successful, they came to lend money for her wedding. After they didn't help me and didn't take an interest in my life growing up, I always thought my parents were fair. I mean, they weren't the richest, but they made sure we had what we needed, or at least that's what I believed. But everything changed when I turned 18 and told them I wanted to go to med school. I still remember sitting at the kitchen table, excited and nervous, showing them the letter of acceptance I got in. "I got in," I said, holding the letter like it was my golden ticket. "I just need your help with tuition. I'll pay you back, I swear." They didn't even look happy. My dad sighed, and my mom glanced at my sister, who was scrolling on her phone like she didn't care. Then Dad said, "We can't help you, son. Money's tight." I was confused. I knew things were tough sometimes, but they always seemed to manage. "Tight?" I asked. "But you helped Sarah with her college fees last year." Mom looked at me with that end-of-discussion face she always used. "Your sister needed help, and we've been saving for other expenses." I was about to argue, but then Sarah chimed in, "It's not like you have to go to med school, you know? You could do something cheaper, like IT or business." That's dumb. I wasn't asking for luxury. I was asking for a chance. Later that evening, I found out what those other expenses were. Dad came home with a brand new car for Sarah. It wasn't some second-hand junker. It was shiny, expensive, and way out of their usual spending habits. That's when it hit me. They weren't out of money. They just didn't think I was worth the investment. I was furious, but what could I do? They made their choice, and it was clear I wasn't part of it. That night, I stared at my acceptance letter, wondering if it was even worth it. How could I afford med school when my own parents wouldn't back me? The next day, I made up my mind. If they weren't going to help me, I'd help myself. I started applying for jobs, anything that would pay. I ended up working as a builder for a local construction company. It wasn't glamorous, and it definitely wasn't what I dreamed of, but it paid enough to cover community college classes while I saved for med school. The first day on the job was brutal. I wasn't used to that kind of labor, carrying heavy bricks, mixing cement, working under the scorching sun. My hands were covered in blisters by the end of the shift, and I could barely move the next morning. But I didn't complain. Couldn't. Every ache and bruise reminded me why I was doing this. I wasn't just building houses. I was building a future. Meanwhile, my parents and Sarah acted like everything was normal. Dad would boast about Sarah's new car to the neighbors, and Mom kept asking me when I was going to get serious about a career. I wanted to scream, "What do you think I'm doing?" But I kept my mouth shut. I knew they wouldn't understand, and honestly, I didn't need them to. I just needed to keep going. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months. My routine was brutal. Wake up at 5 a.m., work a 10-hour shift at the construction site, then take night classes at the local community college. I was exhausted all the time, but I couldn't stop. I had one goal: get into med school no matter what it took. At work, the older guys used to tease me. "What's a kid like you doing here? Shouldn't you be in college or something?" They'd say, laughing as I wiped sweat off my face. "I'm working my way there," I'd tell them, and that usually shut them up. But it wasn't just the work that was hard. It was going home every night and seeing Sarah living her best life. She'd park her shiny new car in the driveway, talk about how easy her classes were, and complain about how boring her weekends were. Meanwhile, I was breaking my back to afford a single semester. My parents didn't seem to notice or care. They never asked how I was doing or if I needed help. The only time they brought up my job was when Dad said, "At least you're learning the value of hard work." Hard work? I wanted to yell. I was drowning in it while they handed everything to Sarah on a silver platter. but I bit my tongue. I knew arguing wouldn't change anything. The only thing I could do was prove them wrong. After about a year of working nonstop, I finally saved enough money to transfer to a better college. It wasn't med school yet, but it was a step closer. I'll never forget the moment I got the acceptance email. I was sitting in my tiny apartment, exhausted after a long day, when my phone buzzed. "Congratulations," it read. "You've been accepted for pre-med studies." I just sat there staring at the screen. For the first time in a long time, I felt like all the sleepless nights and long hours were worth it. I wanted to call someone and share the news, but who? My parents didn't care, and Sarah would probably make some sarcastic comment about how long it took me to get there. So I kept it to myself and celebrated quietly. The next morning, I walked into work with a little more energy. Even when the foreman yelled at me for being slow, I didn't care. I was finally on my way. When I told my parents about the acceptance, their reaction was underwhelming. "That's good," Mom said, barely looking up from her magazine. "Just don't forget to keep working," Dad added. "You don't want to end up in debt." Sarah didn't say anything at all. She was too busy taking selfies in her new designer outfit. I didn't expect them to throw a party or anything, but a little enthusiasm would have been nice. Still, I didn't let it bother me too much. I'd gotten this far without their support and I didn't need it now. Getting into pre-med was just the start of a whole new set of challenges. Balancing work and school was harder than I ever imagined. I'd leave the construction site covered in dirt and head straight to class, sometimes skipping meals just to keep up with assignments. There were moments when I felt like quitting, like the time my car broke down and I had to walk 3 miles in the rain just to make it to class, or the time I got sick but couldn't afford to miss work because I needed the money for textbooks. My parents, they didn't ask how I was doing. The only time they called was when they needed something. "Hey, can you send us a little money for groceries?" Mom asked once, as if I was rolling in cash. I wanted to say I barely had enough for myself, but instead, I sent what I could. I didn't hear from them again until a few months later, when Dad needed help fixing his truck. Meanwhile, Sarah was living in her own world. She'd post pictures of her vacations, her fancy dinners, and her new outfits, all while I was eating instant noodles in my tiny apartment. She never asked how I was or even noticed what I was going through. Once, I tried venting to my mom about how hard things were. She cut me off mid-sentence. "Well, you chose this path," she said. "Sarah's life is easier because she made smarter decisions." Smarter decisions? Like blowing through their money and not having a job? I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I just hung up the phone and got back to studying. The calls from my parents became more frequent, but they always had the same pattern. They'd start with small talk, acting like they cared, but it never took long for them to get to the point. They needed something. "Your dad's truck broke down again," Mom said during one call. "Can you send some money to help with the repairs?" I was in the middle of finals and hadn't slept in 2 days. I was broke, exhausted, and barely keeping it together. "Mom, I don't have extra money right now," I said. Her tone changed immediately. "Well, you can't expect us to handle everything by ourselves," she snapped. "Your sister's busy with work and can't help either." That was the part that pushed me over the edge. Sarah was too busy? Busy with what? Posting pictures of her new shoes? Booking spa appointments? I started avoiding their calls after that. Every time the phone rang, it felt like another reminder that I was only useful to them when they needed something. Meanwhile, the pressure at school was building. I failed a major exam because I couldn't focus. I started falling behind on assignments and had to cut back on work hours just to catch up. That meant even less money, and I was barely scraping by as it was. One night, I sat in my apartment staring at my bills, wondering if I could keep going. It felt like the whole world was stacked against me. But then, I remembered why I started this journey in the first place. I wasn't doing this for my parents or Sarah. I was doing it for me. After that moment of clarity, I pushed myself harder than ever. I stopped answering calls from my parents altogether. I didn't have the time or energy to deal with their constant demands, especially when I knew they didn't really care about me. I focused on what I could control, my studies. I spent every spare second in the library, taking notes, reading textbooks, and practicing for exams. Slowly, I started catching up. My grades improved, and for the first time in years I felt like I was making real progress. But life had other plans. During one of my shifts at the construction site, I slipped while carrying a heavy beam and twisted my ankle badly. I couldn't walk properly for weeks, let alone work. My paycheck barely covered rent that month, and I had to dip into what little savings I'd managed to build. When I called my parents to let them know what had happened, hoping for at least some sympathy, all I got was indifference. "Oh, that's too bad," Mom said, not even trying to sound concerned. "By the way, your sister's thinking about getting a new car. She was wondering if you could help her find a good deal." Couldn't believe it. "Did you hear what I just said? I can't even walk, and you're talking about Sarah's car." "Well, we just thought you'd know more about those things," she said dismissively. That was it. I hung up and didn't call them again for months. The months of silence from my parents were honestly a relief. Without their constant calls and demands, I could finally focus on myself. My ankle healed, I returned to work, and eventually, I saved up enough to finish my pre-med studies and apply to med school. When I got my acceptance letter, it felt surreal. After years of struggle, I was finally on the path I dreamed of since I was a kid. I sat alone in my tiny apartment reading the letter over and over, letting the reality sink in. I didn't tell my parents right away. What was the point? They'd only find a way to bring it back to Sarah or ask for something. Instead, I threw myself into med school. It was even harder than I expected, but I didn't care. I made it this far and I wasn't going to stop now. The long hours, the sleepless nights, the constant pressure. It was all worth it because I knew I was building something for myself. Every now and then, I'd hear from Sarah through social media. She was still living her carefree life, posting pictures of vacations, fancy dinners, and endless shopping sprees. Part of me resented her, but I also knew she'd never been pushed to do more. Mom and Dad had always given her everything, so why would she change? As for my parents, they'd stopped calling altogether. At first, it stung, but over time I realized I didn't miss their calls. I didn't miss the guilt trips or the endless comparisons to Sarah. For once, I felt free. It had been months since I'd heard from my parents. I figured they'd moved on, maybe too busy with Sarah or whatever. Then, one evening, my phone rang. It was Mom. At first, I thought something serious might have happened. Why else would she call me now? I picked up, and she sounded unusually cheerful. "Hey, honey, how are you doing? We've missed you so much." I wasn't buying it. Mom didn't call just to catch up. "What's going on?" I asked. She hesitated for a moment, then said, "Well, Sarah's wedding is coming up, and things are a little tight financially. We thought since you're doing so well now, you could help out a bit." I just sat there for a second, stunned. After all those years of struggling, the first time they call me, it's to ask for money for Sarah's wedding, of all things. "You're serious?" I said. "You wouldn't even help me pay for school? And now you want me to pay for her wedding?" Mom sighed, like I was the one being difficult. "It's not like that. You're successful now, and it's your sister's big day. We just need a little help." I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Are you kidding me? I worked my ass off for years with no help from anyone, especially not you, and now you expect me to just give you money? No way." Her tone shifted immediately. "I didn't realize you were so selfish," she snapped. That was it. I hung up. I didn't have the energy to argue. After that call, I didn't hear from Mom for a while. Honestly, I was fine with that. I didn't need the stress, and I definitely didn't need to keep rehashing the same argument about why I wasn't willing to help. But a couple of weeks later, I got a message from Sarah. It was short and to the point. "Can you at least think about helping? This is important to me." I didn't reply. What was I supposed to say? That her important day didn't matter to me after all the years I'd been ignored and overlooked? Mom tried calling again a few days after that, but I let it go to voicemail. Her message was exactly what I expected. Guilt-tripping me about family and how I should be there for my sister. The thing is, I had been there for family for years. I'd bent over backward trying to earn their support, their approval, anything, but it was never enough. Sarah was always the priority, no matter what. One night, I sat in my apartment thinking about everything. Part of me wanted to forgive them, to just let it go and move on. But another part of me, the bigger part, was tired of always being the one to compromise. They hadn't earned my help, and I wasn't going to give it to them. When Mom called again the next day, I finally picked up. "I told you already, Mom. I'm not helping with the wedding," I said before she could even start. "You're being so cold," she replied. "We're family. Don't you care about that?" "Family?" I said. "What was family when I needed help? You had money for Sarah's car, for her college, but nothing for me. Now you want me to bail you out?" "No." Mom didn't have much to say after that. She just sighed and hung up. A few days later, Sarah called me herself. I almost didn't pick up, but I figured it was better to deal with it directly than to keep ignoring it. "Hey," she started, her voice way too sweet. "So, I heard from Mom that you're not helping with the wedding. What's going on?" I couldn't believe her tone. Like this was some minor misunderstanding. "What's going on?" I repeated. "Are you serious? You've been handed everything your whole life, Sarah. Everything. And now you expect me to pitch in for your big day when no one lifted a finger to help me." She huffed, like she was the one being inconvenienced. "Look, I know things weren't easy for you, but it's not like I had it perfect either. And this is my wedding, okay? It's not just for me. It's for the family." I laughed bitterly. "The family? You mean the same family that didn't care when I was working 12-hour shifts just to pay for classes? The same family that bought you a car while I couldn't even afford bus fare? Spare me, Sarah." She got defensive. "I didn't ask for the car, and maybe if you weren't so bitter all the time, things would have been different. That was it." "You're unbelievable," I said. "You've never taken responsibility for anything in your life. I'm done with this conversation." I hung up and turned my phone off for the rest of the day. After that argument with Sarah, I didn't hear from her or my parents for a while. I thought maybe they'd finally gotten the message, but part of me knew it wasn't over yet. Then one day, Mom showed up at my apartment. I wasn't expecting her, and when I opened the door, she looked like she'd been crying. "Can we talk?" she asked. I let her in, but I wasn't about to let her guilt trip me again. She sat down on the couch and started right away. "You know your sister isn't perfect, but she's still your sister. Family is supposed to support each other." I leaned against the wall, crossing my arms. "Mom, I've been supporting myself my whole life. Where was this family support when I needed it?" She started with the excuses I'd heard a million times before. "We were doing the best we could. Things were tight back then." "Stop," I interrupted. "You weren't doing your best. You made choices. You chose to help Sarah and leave me to figure it out on my own. And I did. But don't come to me now, years later, asking for favors like nothing happened." Her face fell, and for a moment, I thought she might actually understand. But then she said, "I just don't understand how you can turn your back on your own sister." Couldn't believe it. "I'm not turning my back on her," I said. "I'm setting boundaries. There's a difference. And honestly, it's about time someone in this family did." She didn't stay much longer after that. When she left, I felt a mix of relief and anger. Relief that I stood my ground, but anger that she still didn't get it. After that visit, I didn't hear from Mom, Sarah, or anyone else for weeks. The silence was loud, but it didn't bother me as much as I thought it would. I kept focusing on my work, my patience, and a life I'd built for myself. One day, I got a text from Sarah. It was just a picture from her wedding. A big, extravagant affair with smiling faces, a fancy venue, and her in a dress that probably cost more than my first car. The caption said, "Wish you could have been there. Still love you though." I didn't respond. I stared at it for a while, though not because I felt guilty, but because it reminded me of how little they'd ever really understood me. A few weeks later, I got another call. This time it was Dad. I almost ignored it but decided to pick up. "Hey," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I just wanted to say that I wish things hadn't gone this way. We didn't mean to make you feel like you didn't matter." I waited, thinking there was a but coming, and of course there was, "But your sister needed us, and we did what we thought was best at the time." I sighed. "Dad, I don't hate you or Mom or Sarah. I just need space." I worked hard to get here, and I can't keep pretending like the past didn't happen. He was quiet for a moment, then said, I get it. I really do. I just hope one day we can all be close again. Maybe, I said, but it's going to take time. I hung up, feeling a strange sense of closure. For the first time, I felt like I didn't need their validation anymore. I'd made it on my own, and that was enough. We have reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and give us your thoughts about the stories in the comments section. Thank you and see you in the next video.